always, correct? Like, that's what we want. So, today is going to be a different day. I was asked to hold this space, and so this is what I'm going to do. Um, I am quite globally mixed, just a little bit of everything. Uh, I have everywhere in my bones. It's important to me to really, uh, be a part of and understand all the cultures that I come from. That's what my mother taught me, was to study my ancestry. So I've had a chance to study all of the different ancestries that I have, except some of the new ones that I've found. Right. So I've never quite belonged to any of my cultures, though I was raised within at least one of them, though not like my specific, but something similar. Um, and that gives me the ability to love and feel for the heritage and the trauma of many of my different ancestors, right? Equally, right? So if I have indigenous ancestors, which I do, I have that ability to feel for the indigenous, what's going on in indigeneity. I grew up in indigenous communities. I am indigenous, but I also, by that ancestry and understanding that what has happened, have that ability to feel. But the same thing for me, because I grew up knowing who my Black ancestors were and what they had gone through and how they had to pass and everything else, and escape, and the trauma that they had gone through. And so, because of that, I also feel there as well. There's a lot of conversation today between those two ancestral groups that I have about who was here in the Turtle Islands pre European colonization, right? And because there is a lot of conversation currently today um, in the Turtle Islands about, listen, Testy, I don't know who you are, and I would not normally do this, but I'm not dealing with it today because this isn't about me. I'm trying to open this in an honorable way. And if you want to be crappy about me opening it in an honorable way, then that's fine, but you can shut your mouth because otherwise you're being dishonorable to me trying to open this in an honorable way. This is not about me today, but I am explaining who I am because that's important to the communities that this is about today. And I was asked to do this by somebody who is a member of both of those communities, right? I just muted them. I'm not sure, they might still be talking. Thank you. There's probably a mod in here who can block them if I can't. I think I blocked them for me. I don't know. But anyways, so I am indigenous, and I am indigenous to Turtle Island. I'm also indigenous to the Sudan. I'm also Sami. I'm also, Asian. I'm also Celtic. I'm everything, everywhere, everything. That's what happens when you hit into a space where everybody is, getting that admixture in. Um, but today I would like to focus not on the paleoanthropology that we usually talk about, not on the pre-colonized lifeways that we usually talk about globally, but on what I don't normally talk about, Turtle Island indigeneity, because Turtle Island indigeneity is not my lane to speak on. I am not going to speak outside of my lane on that even today, but we will be centering this around what it is genetically to be Turtle Island indigenous. What Turtle Island indigeneity was pre-colonization. Okay, I will turn them back on after I finish saying what I'm saying. Because again, today is not about me. I have people I believe who want to come up and speak, and I have conversations that need to be had. But we are going to start with some specific conversations because I was asked, again, asked, stop focusing on me. Get your head out of your ass. I was asked to do this by somebody else who is a part of both of these cultures who would like this information out there because it's a problem within both communities. And that's a problem that's been identified to me from both communities over and over and over and over and over again since I got to TikTok. Okay, been here 6 months, ain't stopped hearing about it since I got here. It's as bad as a fucking womb land shit. Grow up. We're supposed to be taking care of each other. Stop. Okay, comments are off. until I've opened it up, and then we will have a discussion because that's what it's supposed to be. And if you can't have a discussion like a goddamn adult, you are in the wrong space. It's supposed to be mature content. Get out. Thank you. We're going to go over what DNA is pre-colonization, pre-contact. And we are also going to go over some of the indigenous Turtle Island thought processes. Not ones that I am giving to you from anybody else. I will be reading a little bit, okay? Because again, this is not my lane. I am globally mixed indigenous. And while I grew up within the Pacific Northwest in an indigenous community within the Pacific Northwest, I myself am not a member of a nation and I am not a culture keeper. And therefore, I have no right to speak on. I am doing everything I can to ensure that Turtle Island Indigenous people, my siblings, people I love, have every bit of information that they need to uplift the knowledge that Turtle Island Indigenous people had pre-contact of who they were, of their own histories, of their own traditions, because we have been silenced long enough. And yes, I do mean we, as in the whole of us. But again, I am not trying to speak over or for Indigenous voices. That is not my space, Indigenous or not. Okay? But in this space, we're going to go over what Turtle Island indigeneity is today, what the DNA is, and we're also going to open it up differently than I intended. This is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. First, I will read about Robin Wall Kimmerer so that you know who they are. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a mother, scientist, decorated professor, and enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Her first book, Gathering Moss, was awarded the John Burroughs Medal for Outstanding Nature Writing. Her writings have appeared in Orion, O Magazine, and numerous scientific journals. She lives in Fabius, New York, where she is a SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental Biology and a founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. This is Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you can find this book with her reading it, which you can usually at your local library for free if your local library has any digitized stuff, this is like listening to I got the joy as a child to be able to listen to elders, to sit around and listen to elders speak, and this was like that. Listening to her speak is very much listening to elders speak. It is very much the ability to hear stories and knowledge from a voice that carries that storyteller's way, right? That actually engenders memory, that actually builds memory. We see this with the Druids as well, right? We see this with all cultures that have oral tradition. Hold out your hands and let me lay upon them a sheaf of freshly picked sweetgrass, loose and flowing, like newly washed hair, golden green and mossy. Sorry, I went to the wrong space. There it is. I was like, that's not what it's supposed to say. She fell like a maple seed, pirouetting in an autumn breeze. Adopted from oral tradition and Shenandoah and George, 1988. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled towards them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she's ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gathered: loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully, she stepped up from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depth, the darkness, the pressures were too great for even the strongest swimmers. They returned gasping for air with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go where the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for the relative, and before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human, but when the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched and they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animal, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made, not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants. These she scattered onto the new ground and tended carefully. That's what we're discussing today, Andreas. Hold on just a moment, though, please. Let me finish this and I'll answer that. You can actually comment over on YouTube at all times. The YouTube channel is the YT and Widda Ord ... behind me. I do try and ignore it just so that I can actually focus. Sorry, Andreas. But again, today's conversation will not be held by me. I'm just opening it up with some information. This conversation will be about who Turtle Islanders are pre-European colonization. And this was asked of me by an Afro-Indigenous, as in part Black and part Indigenous Turtle Islander, part descendant of African slave trade, and part Indigenous Turtle Islander, to hold space for this discussion because it has been a problematic discussion for so many of us recently. And so I'm trying to do that. But with that is the discussion. I'm just opening it up with try to at least. I'm opening it up with an elder's words because that's important to me, right? I tried to open it up with identifying, and I didn't fully get to that point. I'll finish that at the end of this because of comments, but I am trying to make sure that we do this in an honorable way and in a good space. And again, that I stay within my lane because it's my lane. With much love. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants. These she scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended to each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from the sky world, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines spread everywhere. And now that the animals too have plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island. Our stories say that of all the plants, Wingash, or sweetgrass, was the very first to grow on the earth. Its fragrance, a sweet memory of Sky Woman's hand. Accordingly, it is honored as one of the 4 sacred plants of my people. Breathe in its scent and you start to remember things you didn't know you'd forgotten. Our elders say that ceremonies are a way we remember to remember. And so sweetgrass is a powerful ceremonial plant cherished by many indigenous nations. It is also used to make beautiful baskets. Both medicine and a relative, its value is both material and spiritual. There is such tenderness in braiding the hair of someone you love. Kindness and something more flow between the braider and the braided, the two connected by the cord of the plait. Wingashk waves and strands, long and shining like a woman's freshly washed hair. And so we say it is the flowing hair of Mother Earth. When we braid sweetgrass, we are braiding the hair of Mother Earth, showing her our loving attention, our care for her beauty and well being, in gratitude for all she has given us. Children hearing the Sky Woman's story from birth know in their bones the responsibility that flows between the humans and the earth, between humans and the earth. The story of Sky Woman's journey is so rich and glittering, it feels to me like a deep bowl of celestial blue from which I could drink again and again. It holds our beliefs, our history, our relationships. Looking into that starry bowl, I see images swirling so fluidly that the past and the present become as one. Images of Sky Woman speak not just of where we come from, but also of how we can go forward. I am going to not read what I typically read of the rest of this, just because it has a point that is important and we'll get to it later. What I am going to do is finish with telling you who I am just a little bit so that I can get you to understand why I feel I have the right to do what I'm doing today. Again, I was asked by somebody to hold this space. I am globally mixed Indigenous. I have indigeneities from every continent, every space, every group of people, several from several different continents, right? And because of that and being raised with the knowledge of the vast majority of them, some are ones I found out through DNA, but Turtle Island indigeneity is not one of those. Neither is the African indigeneity or several of the other indigeneities. Um, and the later ones, the ones I found through DNA, are the ones that I don't have the rich knowledge of because I haven't spent a lifetime studying and being a part of the knowledge of that community. I was raised within a Turtle Island Indigenous community within the Pacific Northwest. The woman that helped raise me, what I call my second mother, her daughters being my siblings, was a Haida woman and Tlingit as well. Um, and I don't give out names publicly because I do not find that to be appropriate. But I would absolutely answer anybody who talked to me on a private level. I don't dox myself as much as I can, so I try not to dox other people as much as I can. And I get so much hate on this app that I would be afraid that it would cross over to my family members. But my grandmother Nani was Red Paint Clan, Eastern Band Cherokee. I do not claim to be Cherokee. I'm not a Cherokee princess. I'm not a pretendian. And my grandmother Polly was Miwok, and her children and grandchildren were registered as Quapaw. I was not, and neither were my ancestors or mothers and grandmothers. And again, I am not Quapaw or Miwok. But my indigeneity is Turtle Island, and I don't believe blood quantum counts. And my raising was within Turtle Island Indigenous communities. And I left that around 5, and when I left that, I learned to read using archaeological texts and books written by Black and Indigenous authors. My mother was reconnecting in the 80s, and reconnecting in the 80s is not what reconnecting is now. There wasn't this global ability to reconnect, right? But my mother did her best to reconnect in the 80s. And so she brought in elders and she'd bring in sun dancers. And so I would learn from that as well. Um, I am currently an archaeologist and an anthropologist, but my focus is not on Turtle Island because Turtle Islanders would prefer that we don't dig up their ancestors, right? And for me, that's important, right? It's important to follow that understanding and knowledge that that is somebody's mother, grandmother. In Standing Rock, it was somebody's son and brother, right? It is important to understand that by digging up people's family, it's wrong, right? And so for me, I won't do archaeology within Turtle Island. And my focus isn't in archaeology in Turtle Island because I don't think that I need to tell Turtle Island Indigenous people who the hell they are. They know. On the other hand, there are plenty of white people who don't know who they are, right? And who I look enough alike that it feels like my lane for everybody, right? And it doesn't feel like I'm trying to tell Black people who they are. So, like, I'm not going to go and study African archaeology and tell Black people who they are and look like this. That doesn't feel appropriate, does it? And so I mainly study paleoanthropology and European archaeology to teach people who they are pre colonization of Christianity, pre the robbing of their own indigeneity. That are in the United States who are European descendant. So it is my way of giving to my indigenous community and to my Black community a less labor of teaching white people how to find their own ancestry without appropriating ours, right? Um, and again, I'm not appropriating ancestry. I belong, but if you look at me, it's not like I'm advertising. I mean, here's my lamb back earrings. This was not made by me. This was made by a sister, right? So uh, I try and make sure that I teach that. My focus of paleoanthropology, though, also teaches a lot of anti-race theory and also teaches a lot of knowledge. And I also gather a lot of knowledge about Turtle Island Indigenous stuff, not to teach it, but to give it to Turtle Island Indigenous people. Hey, archaeology said this. Look, hey, this was proven right. There's our oral tradition. That's it. That's it. So that you have tools and weapons, right? You have an arsenal of the ability. And I don't think of as weapons as like a war, but weapons as look, see, proof. Our stories are right, right? And so that is why, and my knowledge of those things is why I was asked again by an Afro-Indigenous person to hold this space today. This space today is not about my knowledge, though. I'm going to give you some knowledge of what the DNA states. And then I want to open this space up because we need to discuss what Europe did and all of the aspects of it. And we need to also discuss who people were here. And I do not mean telling ceremonies, I do not mean telling histories, but the knowledge that people were here, that they were not African. That does not mean that we do not all come from Africa originally. Absolutely believe that. I know that that is not everybody's creation story, and I'm okay with that. I'm not telling you your creation stories are incorrect. I'm only going by what DNA states. And I believe that science and religion or spirituality can work side by side. I can tell you why I believe that Turtle Island Indigenous people are absolutely uniquely created here to Turtle Island. And we'll get to that. That's going to be our next part of this conversation. But because, again, this is not about me today, I want to open up the comments again. I only closed them down so that I could speak because it was not able to speak. I'm going to open up the comments. I again ask that you speak with love and understanding. I am not trying to control people and I am not trying to stop people, but if you're not focused on the discussion today, if you're not focused on the unity that this was asked for, right? Because the person specifically stated, we need unity. We need to stop arguing. And this happens a lot between these communities, right? We need unity if we're going to move forward. And I was reminded of this no more in the world recently than when I was asked to go and sit in with somebody for a campaign that's running for presidency that was asking for Indigenous voices for the campaign led by, uh, you know, uh, a marginalized voices campaign and was asking for Indigenous voices to come in because they're advertising for land back, but they have no Indigenous voices, like, which becomes a buzzword, right? So I'm reminded of this no more than I was reminded of it last night. We need to understand each other and love each other and be working forward movement for each other, right? Because we are all dying under the thought process that is controlling all of us. Okay? So I'm asking you to speak with that intent within that space, this space, because that is what this space is intended for. I'm going to go ahead and turn them back on. Again, I hope to discuss DNA next. And then after I discuss DNA, what I want to do is, and I don't mean my DNA, people. We're not discussing my DNA. What I would like to do after I discuss what Turtle Island Indigenous DNA shows from the archaeological record pre-contact, hello everybody, then I would like to offer this time in this space for people who would like to speak with intent. I do not want people coming up screaming and yelling. That is not the space. That is not the right way to behave within this. That is not any of our ways. That is white. And we're not going to act white today. Okay. So I'm going to ask that people who would like to speak and who would like to have some conversation to come up. But I'm asking that anybody who comes up speaks with positivity and intent. I'm also asking that people understand that we're focusing on one topic today. I don't want to discuss all the other ones that are probably out there and all the other horrors that we know are existing. We know that they are there. Okay. Um, no, it's not misleading. And I want to ensure that when we're having these conversations and we're having this discussion, that we are doing it with the kindness and intent that this is supposed to be happening. And please don't make my mods work so hard, or I'll have to turn off the comments again. And if you're white, you're not like, unless you can tell me, like, you could tell me in the comments if you'd like to come up. But this conversation space is not for somebody who looks like me, who hasn't identified that they're not white. Okay. So you need to have a conversation first, right? This is not the space for other voices, right? Um, and again, I understand. I'm very light for this, but again, this is not about me. It is about being asked to hold space. This privilege was gave me tools, right? This privilege gave me access to tools that other people didn't have access to tools to, and because this privilege gave me access to those tools, and I'm talking about this light skin privilege because I am light skin privilege, right? This privilege gave me some access to some tools, and because I was granted access to those tools, I use those tools for my community, right? And this is me being asked to use those tools for community. They don't have American mummies with afros. They have American mummies with box braids, but the hair is perfectly straight. We'll talk about that actually today. Actually, I'm not even lily white. Lily white's almost translucent. I'm actually kind of golden. And that I think comes from having both Turtle Island indigeneity and Asian indigeneity and Black indigeneity, African indigeneity, right? So that mix. No, they don't. They don't have mummies with afros. I would like you to go tell me what mummy. Go and look on Google and find a picture of a mummy with an afro. And then I would like you to tell me what the name of the mummy with the afro is. If you can do that, then I will look and see if there is actually a mummy with an afro. Okay. So we're not talking anymore about me, but what we are going to talk about is what the DNA shows and what the mummies in South America actually show. Okay. Um, and we're going to talk about the Olmec heads. So the DNA, Google isn't censored if you censors if you go to Google Scholar. I mean, I find shit on Google all the time. You know, and I'm an archaeologist. Like, I study this shit. There's no mummies in South America that have afros. Sorry. Yes, I know. Okay, so I'm sorry, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and do it again just because, as you can see, it just gets like this. I'll turn it on to sub only so I can look back through a couple of things. That does not mean that you need to subscribe. If you are in here and you would like to talk and actually have a conversation, the YouTube is behind me, right there. And that YouTube right there, you can go and type so that you can see, if you have something that you want to say, or if you would like to speak up and have something that you would like to say, and you are Indigenous, or you're not trying to call this all lies. If you disagree, I understand that, but disagreeing with no proof is jack shit. Sorry. Right. And yes, I agree 100%. Western proof is jack shit as well. But Google is not Western proof. Google gives you access to the East as well. And Google gives you access to stuff in Africa as well. And Google gives you access to stuff in, like Australia and in the Pacific Islands. Google gives you access to everything. So it's not Western. You just need to make sure that you're not looking at Western European documentation, and then you might find your information. Okay. But Google gives you that access, right? So the DNA pre-colonization and all of this stuff is on the widdaord.com website right next to me. So that you can go and look and see that my facts actually line up with current archaeological knowledge and current DNA testing. So Of course, as science moves forward and as we get new understandings and new tools and knowledge, we're going to find new information. Anybody who's been looking at any form of, I mean, shit, it's all over CNN these days, right? There are constant new finds coming out, constant new information coming out. The latest and the newest information, a southern boat route. Uh, and why we know this is from the DNA within Turtle Island Indigenous people. And so that's where we're going to start with. First of all, I want you to know that all of this DNA is taken from finds from pre-contact, which means they're taken from finds before the 1400s. They're finds from 900 and before. Some of them are from like 1000 BC. But these are all finds and DNA tests done on finds pre-contact European. Okay. So there is no possibility that these finds are tainted by some admixture at this point, that they might be tainted by now. So you are saying, well, that's just because of colonization. This is pre-contact. Most of this is in South America. And the reasoning for this is that we do have some DNA testing done on finds in North America, but within Turtle Island, North America is Turtle Island itself. Within North America, Turtle Island, we're seeing that most people who were able to repatriate their ancestors that had been dug up. And in that repatriation of their ancestors, a lot of this happens before the ability of ancient DNA testing only being 20 years old. Svante Pablo just won the Nobel Prize for the invention of polymerase chain reaction, which is the ability to actually test dead DNA, test DNA from somebody past the end of life, basically. They were able to do some DNA testing, relatively recent deaths, but anything past like 100 years. And I think that some people call ancient DNA everything after the time of death. But I personally would say ancient DNA is everything after 100 years. And that is because of the rate of decay of DNA, and especially the different spaces. If it's a hot, moist environment, it's going to degrade faster. If it's an extremely cold, dry environment, it's going to last longer. So, the invention of polymerase chain reaction being 20 years old is when we start testing ancient DNA. Many places in North Turtle Island have repatriated their remains by now. I do know that they were able to DNA test, and I say able to, but that makes it sound like it's like positive, and I'm not positive if it's a positive to me. But I do know that they tested Kennewick Man before they returned Kennewick Man. Um, and I do know that there was like two other finds that they were able to test. And again, I don't like the word able, but it's just the only word I think that fits, to test before they returned. So we have very limited finds within North America. Yeah. I think it's polymers. It's I think it's the last is like MESER or something like that. There's an S in the back end of that word, Tamara. And so with polymerase chain reaction, and I would just go with PCR. You can search ancient DNA PCR, and it'll explain what PCR is. With polymerase chain reaction, the ability to test these things, now they're able to test finds pre-contact. This is why we don't have so many in North America and where we have more in South America. Looking at South America pre-contact finds, what they are finding is that we see Neanderthal DNA and Denisovian DNA and what we call a ghost species. If you are new to my lives, you do not, thank you, Mia, you do not know what a ghost species is, most likely. Though there have been some conversations about this in the news recently, so you might. A ghost species is something that we see a very brief bit of, a fingerprint of in our DNA as a Homo sapien, but we haven't found that species in the fossil record yet, or if we have, we haven't gotten DNA from them. The only species that we've actually gotten DNA from in the fossil record is Neanderthal and Denisovian anyways, right? So we see that there is Neanderthal, Denisovian, and a ghost species that is unique to Turtle Island. Okay, this ghost species fingerprint, this genetics from the ghost species are in no other group of people except for Turtle Island. They're not even so. X1 mitochondrial DNA starts here in Turtle Island, and X2 mitochondrial DNA is from X1 mitochondrial DNA, and that's in Siberia. Not even in them do we see that ghost species DNA. So that ghost species DNA is unique only to Turtle Island indigenous people. Now, we have finds within Turtle Island recently, the Cerruti mastodon find, and again, all of this stuff is on the widdaord.com site. That's that right there. Okay. We have finds recently that push the dating of people being back here in the Turtle Islands back. The Cerruti mastodon find is 130,000 years ago. It is in San Diego. The head archaeologist is the principal archaeologist of the San Diego Museum of Natural History, and he has deemed these bones to be mastodon bones that were processed right after a kill to get needles, awls, bone tools that you would use with a bone, right? And marrow from the internal of the bone. And this is processed by a hominin species, a Homo species, because Homo species are the only ones of us to use tools like this. And we do not see even today primate species processing bone. Okay. So this, they do use tools. Primates do use tools, and they do use simple tools, but they don't do stone tools like we do, right? And so this find shows juvenile mastodon bones that have been fractured while still wet. Now, they have used several branches of archaeology, experimental archaeology, and other forensic teams and other knowledge to gather the knowledge that this happens when those bones are still wet. The reasoning we know that this happens when the bones are still wet is that the fracturing pattern on the bones does not happen in dry bone. I want you to think of a piece of toast. When you take your piece of toast out of the toaster and you slather butter on it right away and it gets nice and moist and wet, right? If you try and break it, then you kind of got to tear it, right? But if you wait a couple of hours and it sat out on the table and it gets really dry and it wasn't too wet to start with, when you break it, it's going to break differently. If you wait 2 or 3 days and it's really stone bone dry and you break it, it just shatters across, right? So when we're looking at this, this is what they're looking at within bone. So this negates the thought process that these damages to the bones happen during construction and finding of the bones, right? Because that's the whole argument from some people, right? But the bones are fractured in a spiral fracture pattern. Spiral fracturing happens when you actually twist wet bone that is still within the body. And I know this because before I was an archaeologist, I was a radiographer. I grew up in indigenous medicine. That's how I was trained. I was a medic before anything else. But I did in Western medicine, I did radiography. And so I studied bones. It's pretty artistic, and it's something that I can use, and I always knew that I could use in anthropology and archaeology. But I can know from bone study and from this that one of the things that they identify as a child abuse fracture is a spiral fracture, because a spiral fracture only happens when you twist the bone. So if you get a spiral fracture in a child's forearm or in a child's leg, they almost always automatically, and we are taught as radiographers to think that it is a child abuse case because it happens from the twist of the bone. So we know that the spiral fracturing in the Cerruti mastodon is wet bone being twisted inside the body, right? The other thing is that the way that the other fractures are on the bone are demonstrated from breaking wet bone, like we were just talking about with wet toast versus dry toast versus a week old toast, right? So what we're seeing is that there's also, and what we call this is in situ, which means among the bones in the layer, right? In the archaeological layer, we are seeing there's what we call stone tools. These are pretty rough elemental stone tools. These are quick and expedient tools. Somebody grabbed a really big rock, put it down, put the bone on top of it, took another rock and cracked the bone as much as they could, okay? These are the wet fractures from cracking. Now, again, this is being done to pull tools. You're going to use this for bone makes needles, right? Bone makes awls. You can't get stone to make those things very well at this time, right? Um, so we are looking, and we also know that Homo erectus had clothing and used clothing wear. So tools for clothing making does happen at this time period. This is 130,000 years ago again. All of this evidence shows that we are looking at a kill processed right after, you know. And what this is we're looking at a mastodon. There are a lot of megafauna on Turtle Islands. Because there's so much megafauna in the Turtle Islands, that means there are other large predators. You're going to kill that. You're going to get as much as possible because you can't take all of it. It's a fucking mastodon, right? Like it's the size of a house. So you can't take all of it. So you're going to take what you can and you're going to get out before the other large predators come in. And bone and marrow are important. Marrow actually helps brain growth, right? Because you're looking at something that has a high degree of fat in it, and that goes directly towards brain growth in neonates and in developing brains, children who are developing brains, right? So this is a process in a leaf. This is 130,000 years ago. We know that Homo sapiens really aren't out of Africa at 130,000 years ago. And we currently know that Erectus makes it into islands in the Indonesias. The island of Flores in Indonesia, and then the island of Luzon in the Philippines. Both of these involve a water crossing. You absolutely have to cross water to make it to these spaces at any point of time because they're both below the Wallace line. We also see in Australia a 120,000-year-old find, which would also be a Homo erectus find or a descendant of Homo erectus. And we also see a ghost species in Indigenous Australians. So Turtle Island aren't the only people that have these, or isn't the only continent that has these that we don't normally think that we would find these on, right? Australia has this as well. But again, today we are focusing on Turtle Island. So with this knowledge, with the Turtle Island find of the Cerruti mastodon pushing us back at 130,000 years ago for human occupation here in Turtle Island, and this is where this becomes important to understanding that science sometimes proves origin stories truth. Okay. If we are so at 130,000 years ago, Homo sapien isn't out of Africa, so this is not a Homo sapien group, which means that the only other species that's made it across continents and waters and out of their original space at this point in time is Erectus. Erectus is subspecies of Heidelbergensis or Gaster, things like that. Rudolfensis have all made it into islands, into all parts of Eurasia and speciated in different ways in different parts of Eurasia. Turtle Island is Turtle Island is supposed to be just North America. I cannot say South America's version that I have been taught properly, and that's why I don't use it. I use Southern Turtle Island just because of the fact that I'm gonna see, like, I'm gonna butcher it, and I can't even like picture in my mind how it was spelled enough to be able to. And my mind will do this; it'll take things and it'll twist them just slightly so that I can't picture them enough, and that's why what it is I've got to know it like about 7, 8 times. And once I've known it about 7, 8 times and had a serious conversation about it, I'll have it and I'll get it. But until then, I don't want to use it because I don't want to be disrespectful to the indigenous verbiage, right? Or to the pronunciation. So with hold on, so with this, we see that Homo sapien not being out of Africa and not having gone into separate spaces, that the only peoples that are going into separate spaces are Erectus or their descendants, which are the different subspecies of Erectus. Which means that whoever is here in Turtle Island at 130,000 years ago is either Erectus or a subspecies of Erectus. By 130,000 years ago, Erectus seems to have died out across the globe. So this is most likely a subspecies of Erectus because those are who continue on. We see those up until 13,000 years ago across the globe, right? And so because of this, this means that the indigenous Turtle Island legends that state that we speciated here, that we were created here, are true because we equate this to the ghost species that we're seeing in Turtle Island indigenous DNA. Erectus makes it out of Africa and speciates into Neanderthal, speciates into Denisovian, and speciates into um, Lizonzus and Dragoman and Florensis, right? It speciates into all of these different things. When we meet these different things, we mix with these different things. We mix with Neanderthal, we mix with Denisovian. We have 5 ghost species in us. The 3 in Africa and 2 in one in Turtle Island and 1 in Australia, right? So because of this, we know that Erectus going in different spaces mixes with Sapien when Sapien comes into those spaces. Okay. So Erectus making it over here into Turtle Island and speciating here in Turtle Island is absolutely going to give that we were created here. When Homo sapien comes over later and meets Erectus and incorporates with Erectus. By this point, you need to understand that Erectus is probably a very small species, whatever it is speciated into here. I'm going to my thought process, and from what I understand, and from the legends that I know, and from what I understand of early archaeology, I believe that this would be the giants that we speak of. And the giants are throughout tradition, and we've also found giant skeletons across the globe, but the vast majority are here in Turtle Island. Like 27 giant skeletons are documented as having been found here in Turtle Island, all within mounds. We do not have the skeletons anymore because early archaeology was grave robbing, right? Washington documents watching an indigenous woman being buried and going out and digging up the burial space right after her family leaves and robbing the grave, right? Early archaeology was grave robbing. The Giants Tamara or the Washington? Because Washington, I read it in archaeology class. And giants would be 7 to 9 feet tall. We actually have giganticism still within our species. But again, that's not something that archaeology or science or Western thought has any agreement to possibility. That is my mind stating that's what I think it would be. Okay. Because of the oral traditions that I know that we have, right? And because of what I understand of island giganticism and island dwarfism, and because of what I understand of movement of population. So, island giganticism and island dwarfism state that if you are in an environment that has, yes, thank you, Sleepy. I totally, and you're right. You should absolutely clarify. Again, giant is 7 to 9 feet tall, and it is giganticism is something we still see within our species today, and we actually have people between 7 and 9 feet tall within our species today. But the Creole Mound in Charleston, West Virginia, there is a giant find there, yeah. But there's are several, and I can't remember like off the top of my head. And the problem is that all the articles are digitization. They're all from early 1900s and before, because all these finds are early 1900s and before. When you have these archaeologists going out and digging up these mounds because they don't have rules in place, and it's not even archaeologists a lot of time. It's grave robbers, like people without any formal study at all, going in and just robbing space, right? And because of that, you're going to see like you'll see like an article that has a picture of them with a giant from a space that they robbed that's in this like like standing up, and then it has the article and it tells you where they found them, but the articles themselves aren't digitized. They're in some museum, like, and I can see where they're in a museum, but to access them is a paywall and money, right? So um but uh island giganticism and island dwarfism states that if you are in a space that has a small amount of space and a small amount of large predators or no large predators and a small amount of nutrients, that you're going to shrink. This is how we get the hobbit, and this is how we get the dwarf, because Florensis is a hobbit species. Its height is 3'5" at its tallest, and they have large feet. And Lizonsis is tops out at 4'5". And Lizonsis is so new, I don't know like the full skeletal structure of it very well yet, but we do know that they're very short. And this is because of island dwarfism. We see the vast amount of megafauna really is here in Turtle Island. And we see that that's because of island giganticism, and we dictate it as island giganticism. When you see that, uh, sorry, there was 7'1" is not uncommon among Indigenous men. This is very true. This is pointed out. My uncle was Chickasaw at 7'1", and we have a young Cherokee. Oh, I'm saying that wrong. A young Apache man who stands at 7'8" in his 20s. So uncle is Chickasaw at 7'1", and so we see that that actually translates over today. We see a lot of very tall Indigenous people today, but when we look at island giganticism, and when we look at Homo erectus spreading across the rest of the globe, what we're seeing is that everywhere else that Homo erectus goes, that the population results from their speciation stays small, i.e., the Neanderthal population was never large. The Denisovian population was never a large population. And this is because as they're leaving, they're taking and narrowing a genetic diversity with them. And so the population stays small because of a lack of genetic diversity within the populations, which decreases viability. So you're going to see that if Homo erectus is making it to Turtle Island, the amount of people that are coming with Homo erectus to Turtle Island are going to be a small amount of people, which means that you're looking at a small group in a vast space, right? And it's never going to get very large because it's going to remain semi-isolated. And so you're looking at a small group in a vast space with a large amount of megafauna and a large amount of food, nutrients, right? So island giganticism and island dwarfism tells us that they would absolutely become gigantic. That is how evolution works in that way, and how we have seen evolution play out in every other space that has that isolation in that kind of a space, right? We see it play out even in other hominins or homos. I hate to use the word homos because so many people take it wrong. In other humans, which I'm going to specify, I do not mean Homo sapiens in that. When we see Florensis and dwarfism in, or not dwarfism, because sorry, that's incorrect. We see being a dwarf species within the Lanzonsis. My throat is not working today. So this is how we know genetically that Turtle Island Indigenous people are absolutely indigenous to Turtle Island and have been here for a long time. If they species here Homo erectus wise into the giants and sapiens come over and mix with, incorporate that group, then the resulting people have absolutely originated here, have absolutely speciated here, right? Or as creation stories would put it, been created here, right? They have been created here. They became a species here. They became a group here. They are not their own species now. We are all one species. This is how we're all able to have babies together. Okay. They're not their own species. Race doesn't even exist. It's been debunked. But this is how they have a unique species within them, the ghost species, and how we know that they have been here forever and they were absolutely created here as well, which goes with some, not all, but some of the creation stories within nations, within Turtle Island. So, the last thing that I want to touch on of my knowledge with archaeology, that there are other things. No, first of all, with archaeological finds here, we have 4 or 5 finds that are roughly 30,000 years old. Some of them are like 27, one is 23. All of these are on the widdaord.com site. There is a tab that says Turtle Island Indigenous Finds for Turtle Island Indigenous People, so that you can go and see what the archaeology is proving of our knowledge now, right? That makes total sense, pretty. So all of this has proof behind it. And we do see that Homo sapiens sapien has been here for at least 30,000 years. There is a group that was here when they got here that they became a part of, okay? So 10,000 years is what we believe it took for them to get the amount of Denisovian DNA, 0.02 to 0.03%, of mixing with Denisovians to get to that point. Okay. So we know that they were about 10,000 years within Asia before they make it to Turtle Island. Or, maybe a couple Denisovians come with them, right? So with that, we absolutely, well, actually, that probably wouldn't work with just a couple Denisovians because it takes several breedings to get to a point that you're going to have a breeding that's going to carry on the genetics, just because of the fact that two species interbreeding, many of the children are like mules where they're unable to procreate. But like mules, every once in a while, one will be able to procreate. And that's what we understand and how we understand that it was the 10,000 years of living with Denisovians and mixing with Denisovians to get to that Denisovian DNA amount. So this shows that there is no way DNA wise that Turtle Island indigenous people were recently from Africa. Okay. Uh, Anybody that is Turtle Island indigenous left Africa 50,000 years ago, spent at least 10,000 years in Asia, made a boat trip, most likely, whether it is the Southern Pacific Highway or the Northern Pacific kelp route, or it is across the Arctic, which is how they went back several times, or it is during the later period of migration, because there are several waves of migration into Turtle Island. During the later period of migration at the end of the ice bridge, right, or the land bridge, right? Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Um, so with that, I think I've touched on all of the different DNA things. I want to talk about what's behind me on the screen. This is used way too often as it's off absolutely African phenotype. Now, first of all, I want to state that we have decided that phrenology is a pseudoscience, which means that the belief that your race or culture is dictated or ethnicity is dictated based on your skull type and the structure of your skull is a pseudoscience. We know that nose shape and lip shape and ear shape and jaw shape, and the vast majority of eye shape is global. The inner fold, the emphatic fold in the inner corner of the eye is Arctic. That's an Arctic adaptation, and it's everywhere across the globe in the Arctic. It doesn't matter which ethnicity you belong to across the globe. Anybody in the Arctic areas are getting that inner fold on the eye because it is about reflection of sun back, right? Because sun reflects on the snow and then back up into the eyes. And so, because of that, they have that inner fold to try and prevent that. That's an adaptation. Other than that, eye shape is global, right? So, we know that the idea that phrenology will dictate where a person lives or is from is false. So, taking phrenology from stone sculptures, and deciding that the phrenology from stone sculptures attributes to what the group of people look like in and of itself is a little bit problematic to me. But I do want to point out that what is often said to be an African phenotypical skull structure or facial structure is, in fact, phenotypical to Turtle Island indigenous people in the area that the Olmec heads are found. These are groups of people who are very, these are taken from groups of people who are still not fully isolated, but you're not seeing a lot of admixture within. Okay. So it's not like you're going to be able to say, okay, so these are pictures of post colonization. Obviously, there's some African in there, right? That's not what this is. This is taken from groups of people who are still pretty close within their structure. People within nations that are still working within those areas, right? So the Olmec heads are in the southern tip of Mexico, if I remember correctly. I'm so geographically challenged, and I want to make sure that before I state where they're at, I remember exactly where they're at because it goes along with the groups of people that are there. Yes, in Mexico. So the Dene people, okay, so Dene language group, like Proto-Indo-European or Indo-European, we can trace language groups within the Turtle Islands, okay? The Dene language group actually starts at the southern tip of Mexico and goes up into the mid plains, the Midwest, right? The plains of the Midwest. This does not mean they're all one nation, and I'm not stating that. But what I'm stating is like Proto-Indo-European becomes most of Europe, you know, Proto Dene is the same language group, showing that they're coming from the same people, but after time, they're kind of like developing into their own nations, right? So, and we're looking at the same timeline, right? Because Europeans aren't making it into Europe until roughly 30,000 years ago either. So, Europeans are making it into Europe, and Turtle Island indigenous people are making it into Turtle Island at roughly the same time period, okay? And so your language groups coming with you, like Proto-Indo-European and Proto Amero Dene. I don't know how they would state that. It was told to me as Dene, but and Proto Amero Dene, right? Um, you're going to see that the resulting nations of Proto-Indo-European or Germanic, Celtic, Latin, Turkey, India, Irish, right? Like, so these are all the resulting nations of Proto-Indo-European. The resulting language of Proto-Dene comes out to many different nations, right? But that Proto-Dene language group goes from the southern tip of Mexico up to the plains of the Midwest and all along the Pacific Northwest coast. Everything from roughly, I think, because it's such just like this little thing on the map. I can't tell you exactly. I think it's like mid Oregon up to Alaska is all the same language group, which tells us that we're looking at people who often have root in the same genetic ancestry, right? Now, everybody wants to think that Turtle Island indigenous people all look like a Lakota man from the plains, all look like Crazy Horse, right? This is very untrue. I myself, again, grew up in the Pacific Northwest. This is what Pacific Northwest indigenous people look like. Almost always, you were looking at somebody who is rounder of face, flatter of nose, and larger of lips. Almost always in the Pacific Northwest. Not always. Nothing is monolithic. And in fact, the man that I call my first husband, though he's not my first like technical husband, and I did not have children with him, was Swinomish and Upper Skagit, but he had a little tiny bit of German in him. And that little tiny bit of German in him made him look like he was Plains. And everybody else in his family looked very Pacific Northwest, rounder of face, larger of lips, and flatter of nose, right? Well, and that's because it's that proto. So 30,000 years ago, they all share the same language. Just like 30,000 years ago, English moves into Europe, it's Proto-Indo-European and then divides into all those other languages. By now, they're going to maybe have similar dialects, but that's going to be the closest of it, right? You're going to see that they're going to have several, yeah, just to make sure, like I want to make sure that I'm being clear. You're going to see that there are going to be several different languages that have developed out of it, but your root words might be the same. And I'm going to give an example with Indo-European. The Parisi people are a Celtic group. That's where we get the word Paris. And it also relates to Parsi in India, right? So this is two words that you see from the same root word they came from in Proto-Indo-European. And because there are two completely different areas, but they started in the same and they sound completely different. Parisi, Parsi, but they start the same. Just for an example. But with this, you see that in the Pacific Northwest, you absolutely see that this is very much a look. And you also see it in many Dene people I know, right? Many people who are from the Dene Res. I know a very good friend of mine is Dene, and she's like, I don't know how I have this moon face. And I'm like, I know how you have that moon face, right? Like it's you very much see this in different spaces. So this is very Turtle Island indigenous. This look that you see on the Olmec heads behind me, this is Turtle Island indigenous phenotype. It's just not Plains Turtle Island indigenous phenotype. And y'all got to stop thinking that Turtle Island indigenous phenotype is only people that you identify as Sioux, right? The Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people are not the only phenotype of Turtle Island indigenous people. Um, so with that, this is where archaeology, science, DNA, modern understanding, and listening to indigenous voices gives us the knowledge of what Turtle Island. Sorry, I know that got sloppy first, like went floppy for a second. This gives us the knowledge of who pre contact Turtle Island indigenous people are from pre contact Turtle Island indigenous sources, not post contact. I think it's mine, Tamara. But pre-contact indigenous sources, right? English is Germanic and Welsh is Brittonic, but Brittonic and Germanic both come from Proto-Indo-European, right? Like so, and it just shows what it is how far back did it break, and then what did it break into after that far back, right? Yeah, it's me. It's me. I'm crazy. Um, so with that, what I want to do, and like I said, this isn't about me. I'm giving my knowledge because I that's what is needed and what has been asked, and because like I said, my only focus on Turtle Island Indigenous, I want to say architecture, and I know it's not the right word, and it's not. I know it. I mean, I don't do architecture, but and now I want to say, oh, my words are not working today. Anyways, the reason I'm an archaeologist. Uh, okay, so the reason I don't focus on Turtle Island indigenous archaeology being not wanting to dig up ancestry, the things that I find of Turtle Island indigenous archaeology, the things that I find where my field prove Turtle Island indigenous history is correct, I try and give those to people so that they can use them, right? But I don't focus on it because, again, it just feels icky to me. Like it just feels like I'm digging up grandma and it's not okay. So are you quoting me? It is me. I am the problem. I'm always the problem. So uh with that, I'm going to open up the comments again. And again, we will have to turn them off if it gets nasty. If you want to comment with love and you want to speak or it is off because of that, the YouTube is right there. Please go over there. It's open up for comments all the time. I don't know how to turn them off. I don't even know how to have mods over on YouTube. I'm such a technophobe. Um, and again, if you would like to speak on this topic in either requesting better understanding of something or trying to ensure that people maybe understand a little bit more, or trying maybe to get people to understand what it feels like when somebody is trying to erase you like that, any of those things like that, that is totally understandable. I'm not going to invite people up who want to scream and yell, right? And race is not real. You are right. I did say race a couple times, but we frequently talk in here about how race has been debunked. It doesn't exist. That makes sense, no Moss. That's awesome, Shaylee. Hi, Edie. South America and Native America, I mean, Native South Americans is would you prefer that? And are you an indigenous person from South America that's trying to correct that, or are you just stating? So you cannot tell a race of a person by looking at their bones. So, do I have an opinion on the evidence of dark melanated black natives being here and not all African? So, dark of skin, absolutely. Okay. Skin is one phenotype, and it ranges based on place upon the equator. Okay. So, if you are Inuit or Inupiaq, you might be lighter of skin, right? You might actually be really, really naturally pre-colonized pale of skin because you live in an Arctic region. Whereas if you are in Brazil, and you are along that equator, you're going to have extremely dark skin because you have sun all the time, right? So you're absolutely going to see that there is a wide variety of ranges of skin color within a Turtle Island indigenous range, right? It's all within the Turtle Island, the Americas. All within the Americas, you're going to see a wide variety of indigenous skin color. Um, you could even equate the level of darkness to being sub-Saharan in some spaces. You do see that certain spaces seem to have a different kind of undertone to skin. Like you see, we say like Asians have Asia gives almost a yellower undertone to skin, right? And in Turtle Island, you get almost a copper undertone to skin, right? And so you are going to see that in Turtle Islands, you're going to see that that very light skin up way north and that very dark skin along the equator both have that copper undertone to them. Okay. The same in Asia. You're going to see that that very light skin that comes in very far North Asia compared to the very dark skin that comes in far South Asia is going to have that undertone to it, right? And so you're going to see that the undertone in Turtle Island indigenous, very dark skinned people along the equator is going to be a different undertone than you're going to see in Australia indigenous people or in Africa indigenous people. Mexico is a country, not a race. Just to say, right? I would not be able to speak on who is a part of or of what nation or peoples in space. Um, I can speak to the fact that we are taught in genetics. When I was taught genetics, I was also taught language differences within that. When I was speaking about Dene language, it comes in correlation with the genetics that we see within Turtle Island, and that's where I was taught about the Dene language. I've done linguistics, but I haven't done linguistics in Turtle Island, and I haven't done linguistics as a focus on specific languages. Indigenous people are absolutely here first, and as we were just stating, our oldest find in Turtle Island is 130,000 years ago, and it would be a Homo erectus, which is a speciation of Homo erectus, and which would be the ghost species we see in Turtle Island indigenous people. Yes, many people who want to look at Mexican as being so Mexico is a foreign occupation. It's a Spanish occupation, and Spanish people are generally actually very light skinned. They're European, they're Celtic descent. Um, and so much of Mexico has very light skinned people. The people that you see within Mexico and the people that we in the United States automatically term Mexican are actually half indigenous, are part indigenous, or or even full indigenous, like have indigeneity in them, and that's why they are darker skinned. They are being called Mexican because their nationality currently is called Mexican, but not because Mexican means dark skin. Ready to Stefan. Do I think Pacific Island people settled in South America? So current DNA states that it was a southern boat route that got people to the Turtle Islands originally. This does not mean that nobody came over during the land bridge, but the land bridge was only open from 18 to 15,000 years ago. So we know even like the Thule people come over at 8,000 years ago. So we know that there are different migration patterns over, but the original migration pattern, it looks like, probably comes through the South Pacific. We're not discussing Europeans today. Latino people, I don't know where the Iraq, that's all within islands down there. I don't believe that it actually is mainland on either, but I don't know for positive, right? I haven't, again, I do not study genetics or anything to do with Turtle Island because that is not what I don't want to I don't want to teach people about Turtle Island indigeneity. It's not my space, my job, or my lane to teach anybody about Turtle Island indigeneity. I will teach you what the DNA states, and I will give proof that Turtle Island indigenous people have asked me to give, or to Turtle Island indigenous people that I know that they are looking for, but I don't study it. I see things and I want, oh, oh, that proves that. That proves that. Okay, I'll pull that. Okay, I'll pull that. That proves that. Oh, I'm so glad they're finally looking at that. And that's the boat route. I'm like, oh, yes, I've thought that for like 10 years. I'm so glad they're looking at it, right? But it is not an area of focus of study because I wouldn't teach anybody who's white about us. That's bullshit, right? Like, how are you going to use that shit? And because you have to be a culture keeper within this culture to teach this culture, and I am not. I don't even belong to a nation. What right would I have, right? So I could not tell you what the genetics of current Tiano people state. I do know that the Tiano were taken down to such a low amount that they had to have admixture to continue, and that is resilience. And the fact that they have admixture from other groups does not mean that they're not Taino. And I said it wrong the first point. It is Taino. Okay. Um, and I do know that the Taino people absolutely are indigenous Turtle Island people. If you have genetics from the Taino people, if you have the history of the Taino people, you are absolutely Turtle Island indigenous. You had to get admixture to resilient through genocide, right? Columbus literally took the Taino people from what we at lowest estimate say is 2 million and at highest estimate say is 10 million, took them from that amount to under genetic ability to continue, what we call genetic extinction, which means that there were so few left that they could not continue on without admixture in under 2 years. Under 2 years. He literally ran the islands red. And because of that, the Taino people were taken down to such a small amount that that small amount means that they had to have that admixture. But having Taino DNA means that you are the result of resilience. That means that you are still here and the Taino people are still here. Indigenous peoples of all lands have not been darker skinned. Uh, the Sami people have been light skinned since they moved into Scandinavia. There are two groups that occupied Scandinavia in the beginning. One was dark skinned and blue eyed, and that's the present day extremely light skinned Scandinavians that we see. And one was light skinned and brown eyes, and that's the Sami, who remain roughly my skin color with brown eyes. Yes, do not fight in my chat. This is not the space. And if you have discussion points, I'm not sure if it's showing me if people have asked to come up. So if you have discussion points and you're trying to come up and speak, and you are indigenous, Afro-indigenous, or Black who would like to speak on this without being, all, if you want to speak on what you think is the African occupation pre-colonization and ask some questions on it and discuss it, I'm up for that, but I'm not going to be told that I'm wrong because I have all the documentation and the evidence. I do not have Twilight. You guys are funny. Monteverde research. No, I didn't. Um, I was looking prior to that. I was looking at stuff prior to that. Monteverde is not that far back. I look at stuff that proves that we were here longer. Oh, I just missed what that one was. Africans, there's no thought process that people from Africa actually made it to the Americas before Columbus. The conversation about Mansa Musa and Mansa Musa's predecessor, absolutely. The conversation about Mansa Musa and Mansa Musa's predecessor, absolutely. Mansa Musa was Islamic, and he documented everything, like everything. And he went all over Africa, and he went to Mecca, but he never went to the Turtle Islands. His predecessor is said to have sailed east and not come back with 30 people. But there's no evidence that he actually made it to the Turtle Islands. I'll go ahead. Welcome, Nomas.
Thank you. First off, border native from Tekken, and I just found out I have some Apache DNA. I'm not sure what clan or anything, so I can't really claim it, but it's there. There's no evidence. I know they always come in and start with this idea that this pseudoscience, which there's no evidence, and I want to thank you for always using the evidence to back up what you speak on. I've been listening to you since the Neanderthal thing because I don't really know much about it, but I'm not educated enough to say that I know anything, So it's cool to see somebody actually use evidence as proof or as the reasoning behind it, because too many people just talk. It's funny that I've always told this story, even before I met my people. My family has always told us we were in the area of Texas before it was Texas, before it was Mexico, before the Spanish got here, before anything. We've always been here. We have my ancestral stories have us battling different people, giants, huge animals, the buffaloes that don't exist anymore. And it's science is what I always say science is just the evidence of what we know now. Like I even talk about that what was that, 2007 when the mastodon bone was found somewhere?
Yeah, I think so.
But I don't really talk about it because we haven't had enough research on it. Even though the finding people have duplicated it on elephant bones, I believe.
Yeah.
Wet elephant bones, they were able to duplicate it. And that will change the timeline, as you say, a lot, obviously. I think the roughest estimate is like 1,000 or 100,000 to 125, somewhere in there in that range.
130,000, I think. History. Yeah.
But there's I talk about the ghost DNA a lot because people don't understand that there's an actual link for all native people on Turtle Island, north and south, right? There's an actual link that we don't understand yet. We haven't been able to prove it. And we're not the only people. It's funny that you brought up the Australian people because there's that, and people don't understand it. It's not us, and they don't want to listen to the facts based in our DNA. Like, we don't have to talk about a DNA test, but you can look up the history of the bloodlines, of the patterns, and there's these weird anomalies that don't make sense to us in science yet. Will we ever find that ancestor? Probably not. Most likely not. They won't dig deep enough. But for the people that we have found, we know who's connected to them genetically.
Yeah.
There's when you're separated from the rest of the world for so long, your mutations change different. On your mother's side, you're going to keep less mutations, but you can track it better. We know who the Inca princess or Inca girl on top of the mountain is related to, even though her hair is braided and beautiful box braids or whatever they call it.
Straight hair, though. If you look at her hair, there was actually somebody. There was a video that was posted yesterday.
Who it is?
Yeah.
We know who the people are. We look at Kennewick, man. We understand where his people are. We look at the cave in northern Mexico. We understand that these people had paintings, had artwork. My people have artwork that goes displays the peyote ceremony 4,000 years ago. We have a petrified peyote button that was found at the site of our painting. Like the history's here. If anyone can claim to be us or understand our cultures or whatever, that's fine. But if you don't have the evidence, we're not going to listen to you. I'm sorry. Like, I couldn't just come to my people and say, hey, I'm from you. And then be like, okay, cool, you look like us. No. And I'm melanated. Like, I'm in the sun. I'm melanated. I'm not a light-skinned person. I'm lucky, I guess, now. It was hard growing up, but
yeah, it's a toss-up, right? Like, I've
yeah.
never found it lucky, but I get the fact that it gives me like that privilege, but I've never felt lucky to have it, So yeah, it's a toss-up.
Yeah, but okay, I feel privileged now that I'm in this space because I didn't know this space existed before TikTok. So when I was finding my people and learning who I was and all that, it was just through a lot of reading books and reading church records and reading mission statements and all this stuff, and it's humbling, but the pain is real. If that makes sense, like you can't accept our people or want to be part of our people without taking in what happened to us on an internal level. That's why I respect that you say, I am these people, but I won't claim these people because I would like that means a lot to people who understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that bothers me when people claim this continent without understanding or taking in the pain that somebody's grandmother and great grandmother had to suffer so they could exist.
Yeah.
When you talked about the Taino people, they survived. They survived to be here today. Somebody's grandmother had to do something they probably didn't want to do or were forced to do something, but they survived. And they can't take that away from us. Like, they always make fun of my eyes. They say I'm Asian. Fine.
Good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's all you got? Like, what about this other part that no one can explain?
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about genetics. So
Yeah.
I just want to come up here and say thank you. I love that you're educated. I love that you teach it on what's the word I'm looking for? An unbiased kind of based off the facts ideas, even though you have your indigenous cultures in you. I can't remember the word, but I'm glad that you push it off as the narrative is not yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's something that needs to be respected because a lot of people just talk like if they own something. I don't even own this culture. We are not a monolith. I am one small tribe from one small clan from one small area. I cannot tell a Diné person. I cannot tell a Mexica person. I cannot tell a Lakota person what they believe is wrong or what they know is wrong because they know that. It's just crazy that Turtle Island all have these stories before. I mean, every Turtle Island people have stories of monolithic or not megalithic animals. Not wrong word, but big animals that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
The Peruvian people may, God look over them, Creator look over them, what they're going through right now. But the Peruvian people have stories of the giant sloths that we've never seen. We have them in history, we have them in the ground, but we've never seen these things. But they still talk about it. It don't make sense how that could happen if we just got here 13,000 years ago.
Real. Same with horses. Like they say that we didn't know anything about horses because we've only been here since Clovis first, right? But they have horse DNA on Clovis points, and there's statues of like little miniatures of horses carved out of bone at way before Europeans' arrival. There's just so much stuff that it's that whitewashing, right? Saying that we don't have these things, and then they finally find it and they go, oh, well, maybe we were wrong, like.
Have you watched that special on Netflix from Graham Hancock? Now I know he's kind of in the archaeological world, but it's funny because he does a lot of like sonograms of the land.
I don't watch Graham Hancock because what Graham Hancock is trying to say is that the Peruvians didn't build that pyramid, that some master race taught the Peruvians how to do it. Or yeah, and so I don't
push the idea.
Right.
But it's cool to see him as far as the archaeological part. I don't
believe
that there was some master people who survived and taught everybody civilization.
With the different archaeology, yeah, absolutely.
But I do like the idea that he does. He looks at things and says, "We haven't looked at this enough." Like even if he's trying to prove a point, when they talk about Serpent Mound has been rebuilt multiple times, but they don't want to say that. They want to say it's this old and that's it.
Yeah.
Like, what does it hurt to sonic? Now that we have these uninvasive techniques, why not? Let's go back. Now we don't have to dig somebody up. Now we can, you know, run some sonar through the dirt and see what's down there. Why not? Why not?
It's
Like, we
that
would have
white
never known
supremacy
that
thing.
other temples. Yeah,
It's they don't
and
want
it's
to be
funny. That's
proven
why. That's
wrong.
why. Like, they don't want to admit that science has changed, but they're gonna have to within the next 20, 30 years. Science is gonna have to bite the butt. Like, I'm sorry, there's no way around it. The more and more studies they do on that Macedon find, like, the more highways go up, the more tunnels go down. They're gonna start finding stuff that they don't want to admit to, but they're gonna have to find it. Like, and we're still. My tribe's barely. We got one family member back from the Alamo dig that we're gonna be able to repatriate, and I'm hoping that they don't get a DNA sample or anything from them, from that ancestor, and we're gonna repatriate them in November. So that's something that we're still dealing with. Land back,
Yeah.
oil find, all this stuff. And then we still got to deal with our ancestors that won't be given to us, that are just dug up and sitting in a box. I'm lucky enough to have a voice in my community, because a lot of my communities on both sides of the border, so they have a hard time dealing with these colleges. I'm lucky enough to help people connect with the right people to get our people back, or at least to set up organizations or set up a group to repatriate our ancestors the right way.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we need to live by what our ancestors would like as best you can. And I think that's why I give you credit, because you won't overstep, and you know that you won't overstep. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you understand that teaching. But a lot of these people in the comment section won't.
And that's real. That's really real. And in fact, I don't want to, but I'm going to have to turn the public chat off probably pretty soon, people, because it's really bad in there. And I'll pull it back. But I will probably have to. It gets really hard for some people to deal with all the racism and shit in there. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, I think for me, of course, and I think it's for many of us, it was learned, right? I can't say that I've never gone into a space and said, "Oh, I am," you know. I did, and I did. Going off the teachings of my grandmother to my mother, actually, before I did my own research, it was wrong, right? Because my grandmother taught my mother based on the father that left, right, when she was a child. So she didn't know that heritage very well. She just knew what she remembered as a child. And so what we had was wrong. And as a child, of course, or as a young woman moving into spaces, it's a learned thing, I think, for a lot of people. But for me, that's extremely important. Like, I identify always as Indigenous. It's the first identity I remember. I don't remember identifying as anything else until I was 12 and I was told I wasn't Indigenous for the first time, right? Because Haida are actually very light. So I didn't look at the rest of the community as being really different. The sisters that I have look like me, right? Like, I didn't see it as a difference. And it wasn't until I came off the mountains and went into a new community that where people were like, "You're not native, you're a pretendian." And I went, "No, I'm not. Wait, what?" And for the first time, I thought of myself as anything else. So it's important to me to identify that I identify as Indigenous, but it's also become extremely important to me to identify that that doesn't mean that I'm claimed by a nation. And that doesn't mean that I speak for a nation. And that doesn't mean that I should ever speak over people who have closer ties or heritage, right? Because that just doesn't feel right to me. Um, and so I thank you for acknowledging that, because that for me is something that I had to figure out how to do in a positive way, and it lets me know that I've figured out a positive way to do it without causing harm, because that's important to me, is that the things that I do not cause harm, right? So thank you very
Yeah,
much for that.
and it's all rooted. Even tribal governments and stuff that you're gonna have to deal with, like we all deal with, it's rooted in white supremacy. Like, till 10 years ago, everybody thought that we said, "Oh, like."
Right.
Like, this is new for a lot of people to understand that, wait a minute, they're still here. They're not just a book in a Western movie. Like, the Taino people exist. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know what Taino people were until I watched the special with John Leguizamo, I think his name is.
Yes.
And
That was a great special too. I know what you're
it was
talking about.
insane. He was so educated. I was like, wow. I did not see that coming from the pest. Like, but you have to take pride if you're connected to any culture, North or South. You have to take pride in what happened in the Caribbean and what came out of the Caribbean because they were the first and the worst contact.
Yeah.
Like you said, they ran red. The waters were stained. Like that island, those islands are stained with nightmares that we can never get back.
I calculated
But they
it.
survived.
I calculated it was 31,900 people a day on average. Because I was writing something on it recently, and I was writing on what Columbus did, and I calculated the time it took him to travel because he returned to Spain twice. And arrived in the fall of '92, and he was done by the end of '93. He returned to Spain twice. It calculates out at the low end at 2 million people. It calculates out at 31,900 people a day.
And that's not even to mention what they did to kids.
That's
and
including,
the generations
yeah.
of people, the generations of people that ended there. You know, it's heartbreaking. And then there's this stuff going on TikTok right now where somebody talked about the native children in boarding schools graves that they found, and it's I don't understand why this hate comes. It hurts.
It does.
Africa has amazing cultures that go back thousands of years. I don't know if you remember I'm talking to you about it in the comments one time. Adam's calendar is dated back to 75,000 years based off of the pigment. It could be older than that, but the paintings is all they have right now, right? Because you can't date rock.
Right.
And I was taught this by somebody who was trying to tell the Aboriginal people that, hey, take pride in where you're from, even if you don't want to claim it or you feel like it's hurt or whatever. Look what's over there. Look at the monolithic structures over there. Like, it isn't like a phenomenon that happened in the Americas.
No.
You know, the temples in Mesoamerica are not a phenomenon. They're beautiful. I've been to one. They're strong. They're put on places where energy is very strong. I will not deny that. I've been to the mounds in St. Louis. You know, I've been gifted to visit all these places in my journey. But I bet the pyramids have the same idea. I bet Göbekli Tepe have the same energy field because they're not. Our ancestors, as a human race, as a people, as a humanoids, I would say, we always looked up. Every culture we know, we've always looked up, and there's a reason for that. Now, do I know it? No. Do I understand it? No. Will I ever understand it? Probably not. We don't have the same sky as they do.
Right.
But there's a connection that people don't want to, like, bro, take pride in who you are. Every culture, even every race that they say now has an ancient culture in it.
Yeah.
The Europeans have Stonehenge. It's based off the stars, you know, like the what's the one Machu Picchu in Peru.
Yeah.
It's based off the stars. Like every giant culture that people know of, the Inca, the Maya, the Aztecs, they all really say the same stuff. All mixed. They all have their ideas. And the people are still here. The genetics are still there, like you were saying in the Yucatan. And when I went to the Yucatan, they were all, I want to say the tallest person I met that was indigenous was 5 foot, maybe. But they looked like the heads.
Yeah.
They were dark, thick nosed. And then I did research on the nose and why, you know, Southern people have thicker nose or other people have thinner nose. And as far as I could tell, science has said that, you know, when air is hotter, it's more humid, your nostrils are wider to bring in more air because it's thicker, I guess. And the more northern you go, the thinner the air is. So you don't need as big. And it's just a trait that evolved. And do I know that for 100%? No, but that's the only thing I could find to study wise that makes sense, you know?
And I've heard that, and I think that that's pretty factual. I try and point out the differences between that and the Neanderthal nose because people are like, well, the bigger nose, it means that get warm air. It's for warm air. But with Neanderthals, it's a different process because of the structure. But I've heard that before. And I think that all of these adaptations coming in different areas specific for the area, that just shows that, people are created an indigenous connection to a space, right? When you're blending with the biome, when you're adapting to the biome, when you're becoming one, it's just that creating, along with our languages and our practices and our understandings of the world around us, our body is adapting to the world in that specific space.
Well, as people, as native people, I'm sure you know, we know we're connected to the earth, to the land, to the trees, to the dirt. And then you look at scientifically, it's been proven. Scientifically, we're made of four things. The tree that's next to you is made of the same four things. You know, everything that we see with life is made of the four same building blocks. You know what I mean? Like, it's already been proven by science. That's why I say that when our ancestors tell us that we were here before anybody else, that we started here, that we became here, we just have to wait on science to prove it. Will they
Right.
ever admit it? Probably not. Not in our life, maybe, but doesn't make it wrong. You know what I mean? And when you look at adaptations, you gotta look like at the jungle people. I don't want to say that word, but that's kind of how like, it comes out. Like the Amazonian, or even like the people in the islands, they have wider feet
Yeah.
naturally.
Yeah.
They have bigger toes. Why? Not it's not. They have bigger pads on the bottom of their feet, not because of them just happen to have want nicey shoes, but because genetically they had to tie themselves to that land to survive. It
Yeah.
was an adaptation. You know, like my people have very good night vision as a whole. We have very good eyesight at night because we hunted at night because it was too hot in the arid deserts or arid areas of Texas to hunt during the day. And this is generations and generations. I mean, even my elders to this day, they don't wear glasses. You know, and they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s. They're old, but they somehow,
Yeah.
you know, and then it ties into the medication that we use, our medicines. Our people are huge peyote people. We were one of the people that saved it, that kept it, right? Uh, and we believe, and anyone who's ever taken our medicines understands this. I'm not going to speak about ceremonies. Everybody has their own
Right.
ceremony. The Lakota has their own ceremony. But when you take ceremony, when you're in ceremony and you come out, the hate for other people disappears somehow. It's this weird connection that you feel that you can never disconnect from again. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's just this. It's like mother telling you, like, "Hey, I told you guys were connected, and now you built this bridge that you're not gonna be able to you've walked across this plane that you're never gonna get back."
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people are yearn for ceremony when they haven't had it for a while, because that connection is so strong and so real that And we're not talking about trying to hallucinate or whatever the Western European idea is. We're talking about medicine. To us, it's medicine. A lot
Yeah.
of these things are medicine.
100%. Well, and I think we can prove that those medicines in all spaces go back so far, and almost all of those spaces, those medicines are never for a hallucination effect. They're all for a reconnection effect, right? That disconnection that we enter into, that like we shut off because of the world around us, and then it gives us that ability to kind of break through that wall that breaks us off and shuts us off a lot of the times. I know for me, like ceremony and just sitting in the trees, like just sitting on the ground among the trees is what I crave the most. Like, because I've been in a city for 7 years and disconnected for 7 years. And for me, having come from nature, having come from the woods, having come from that, it's this ache. It hurts, and I know, it's that the same ache with ceremony. It's that hurt because you're missing that. You're disconnected from the us, from the we, from the world. And for me, I always the we doesn't mean just other humans. Like to me, the we is all of us, that and entire us. And you're right,
Uh-huh.
science has proven we're all interconnected, even the trees, even the trees. I think
Yeah,
that's
for
important.
everybody in the comments who aren't native or who think they may be native or who just want some weird Indian talk in the summertime. I don't know where you guys are at, but in the summertime, go out in the morning barefoot, stand in the grass, stand in the dirt and just watch the sunrise and see how you feel in the morning or that rest of that day. I promise you. What he's talking about is grounding. Our souls, our beings are connected to Mother Earth. And when you just sit there and let go of everything and let her in, your rest of your day will be lighter. I promise you. If you don't believe me, try me. I'm telling you, this is what I was taught as a young kid. Just go out there barefoot, ground out for 10 minutes, just stand there, look at the sunrise, take it in, and then you're gonna be like, huh, it's not that bad. It's crazy. It works.
100.
It works.
100% it does.
But I'm gonna get off of here. Just thank you again. Thank you to everybody who sent me gifts.
Thank you, Namas. I appreciate you.
Keep fighting the good fight. Keep using your brain to get to the masses, because it's a beautiful thing. I'm not as articulate as you, but I understand what you're doing, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate every single one of your words, and I feel that you articulated so many things beautifully that I couldn't articulate in the right way, and so I thank you for that, and I thank you for your encouragement and your love, and I appreciate that, and thank you for being here and for speaking, and the labor and the love that speaking is, right, and the conversation is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sister. Be
Thank
safe.
you, brother. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Again, that was what, for me, this is it's about finding. Today, I want to put focus on and the understanding that, yes, Turtle Island Indigenous people are here pre-colonization, right? Because there is currently issues within our communities that are this argument. Turtle Island, I mean, I have been told Turtle Island Indigenous people are actually Europeans. They're white, right? They're just a mix of white and black. There's a lot of argument currently going on, and it erases all of us. It erases all heritages that are harmed by Europeans. And it gives the ability for Europeans to not take accountability for the trauma that they inflicted, right? It states that the genocide here on Turtle Island didn't happen, okay? It states that instead the people here on Turtle Island were enslaved, right? And that they are the Black Americans that we currently have okay? And then it also states that the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen. It states that people weren't snatched from Africa and brought over here, right? Disconnected from their indigeneity, disconnected from their ancestors, disconnected from their home. It states that this very traumatic experience didn't happen. And not only does it, my grandmother came over on the Middle Passage, the grandmother that I have that escaped slavery in 1750, okay? So it states that her family did not go through that. It states that disconnection did not happen, okay? And it takes and erases everybody's cultures and everybody's heritages, right? It takes and erases African heritage, and it takes and erases Turtle Island Indigenous heritage. And then it says, hey, white people, you're okay. You didn't do anything wrong. Okay? Slavery is the only bad thing you did wrong. Okay? And half of slavery wasn't even there, right? And this is why it's very important for us to realize that Turtle Island Indigenous people or Turtle Island Indigenous, well, one of the reasons, there are several reasons it's very important not to erase Turtle Island Indigenous people. The other thing is something that was just touched on by nomads, and that is nomads, because of the fact that Turtle Island Indigenous people have, until the last 10 years, been thought to have been completely eradicated. Everybody has decided that we don't exist anymore, okay? Everybody has decided that Turtle Island Indigenous people all were killed, that they were genocided. Now, there was an attempt of genocide, absolutely, and that needs to be talked about and addressed and dealt with. But Turtle Island Indigenous people are still here, still fighting, still working within resilience, trying to ensure that their next generations are actually in a positive space that is okay and not abusive and not damaging. And I'm not saying that they're abusing their children. I'm abusive governmental structure and school structure and yanking children from their homes that happens from the government to Turtle Island Indigenous people. Okay. They're trying to ensure that their children are safe. And when you state that they're not real, when you decide that they don't exist, you remove their abilities to ensure their children are safe, right? And I have to state, and yes, this is very much judgment. Okay, I'm going to state that up front. To decide as a marginalized group that it's okay to erase another marginalized group is mighty fucking white. I don't care what your skin color is. To decide as a marginalized person or a member of somebody who has been harmed by white people that white words are more important, right? And to erase a culture that white people have been trying to erase to help them erase that culture is mighty fucking white. And I don't care your shade. Don't care. Stop acting like a European. Stop, not like a European. Stop acting white. Stop acting like a colonizer. To erase an entire people is to act like the colonizer. You're better than that. We're all better than that. Okay. And so when you are erasing an entire group of people, especially when you come from a space of understanding what it feels like to be harmed by another group of people, come on, you're better. You know better. Like, I know your mama taught you better. Like, at least I hope so, right? Because that's a really white thought process. It is. White influence is inherently abusive, only because currently Western thought dictates everything based on an abusive God. It is not that Europeans are inherently abusive. It is not that European heritage is inherently abusive. It is because for the last couple of thousand years, all of European thought has been based on an abusive God process. And once you start basing your idea of how to parent on a narcissistic God who's abusing you, and you try and emulate him, then you're abusing your children. That's why, and we see that in every aspect. We see that with the residential schools that is teaching an abusive God through an abusive tactic, right? Using an abusive God's tactics to try and eradicate a people, right? So it is not necessarily that European is inherently abusive, but white, Western thought, colonialism, this is inherently abusive. And because it's inherently about control. It's inherently about control, and it's inherently about conforming, right? Conforming to a very narrow ideology. And as Nomad said, and I try and point this out often, but I hadn't pointed this out yet today. We're not we're not monolithic. No culture, no people, no anybody is monolithic, right? One thing about humanity is the wide variety of differences in our thought processes, right? No other species has such a range of different thought as humanity. We of all species have no reason to even look towards a monolithic thought because there's no way we can achieve a monolithic thought as a species, right? We are way too different to be able to achieve that. So not being monolithic, we really absolutely have to see that teaching a very narrow monolithic thought process as a conforming control really is harmful, and that's where that is abusive. It is not necessarily European that is abusive because indigenous European thought process is very similar to indigenous Turtle Island thought process, is very similar to indigenous Asian or indigenous African or indigenous Australian thought process. Again, we get back to that belief of interconnectedness, that belief of the entire world being an interconnected being, that even we in the tree, even we in the ground, even we in the, like that interconnectedness, right? And that is cross-cultural. That is one of those things. And again, nobody's a monolithic. Even within that belief of interconnectedness, everybody believes in that interconnectedness in a different language description, right? It's the same we're all connected thought, but how we're all connected changes. right? What that connection means changes because we're not monolithic, right? Hello, Decray. Um, do you think you guys can handle comments for a couple of minutes? Again, I really don't want this to be Sarah-centric today. It's not a Widda-centric's time. I'm going to go ahead and turn them on. I'll keep an eye out on them. I was trying to keep an eye out on as and help while we were having this discussion earlier. Um, and again, if somebody would like to come up and speak, I'm more than, and again, we're holding space for Indigenous people priority here. That includes Afro-Indigenous people. It is not including space for telling Indigenous people they don't exist, though. um, so let me do it this way so that where do I put myself today? All the pictures, all the pictures. Thank you, everybody. Um, and again, I'm willing to answer questions on why we know that Turtle Island Indigenous people are not African, um, other than having, like the rest of us, come from Africa at a certain point of time. I'm more than willing to answer questions about that. I'm just not willing to be told that, unless if you want to give me evidence that I can go and look at and see whether or not your evidence has facts on this topic. No, I don't have any books on this topic. I don't usually have a lot of books, but on the website that I have, Zena, on the widdaord.com, it's right underneath the word space and today. There is a tab that says Turtle Island Indigenous information for Turtle Island Indigenous people, and it has several of these things on there. Paths of migration switch to racist. Do you mean like borders being put up, or you mean like our understanding of the paths of migrations, Black? Absolutely, Zena. So the borders are absolutely put up to erase. The paths of migrations as a borders are absolutely put up to erase. But, dropping a border uh, if the Dene have been crossing and living, if the Dene live here as an entire group of people, and here you put a border, I mean, that's really, oh, the land bridge. You're talking about the migration of the land bridge. So the land bridge gets debunked once we understand that there are people here before 18,000 years ago. Now, it doesn't get debunked as a total debunction. Nobody ever crossed the, yeah, Afro-Indigenous people are absolutely Indigenous people. But the land bridge is, so the land bridge is only open from 18 to 15,000 years ago. So any crossing prior or before means that the land bridge is not, like, if it's before that, it means that we were here before that time was open. It doesn't mean that nobody came over on the land bridge. I do believe that some groups came over on the land bridge. We do see a back and forth migration, actually, though I personally believe that that has a lot more to do with the Arctic Circle and the fact that the Arctic Circle is easily crossed by Arctic peoples. But we do see that X1 mitochondrial DNA starts here in Turtle Island and then is translated back to the Siberian people, where you see X2 mitochondrial DNA, right? So that there is a back and forth, and there are a couple of migrations. So yes, there's probably a migration over on the land bridge. This would be a later migration, but by the time the land bridge opens, people are already here for about 22,000 years. Sorry, 12,000 years, at least 15,000 years at least. And that's Homo sapiens. It would be that Homo erectus is 130,000 years old find with the Ceruti mastodon find. Yes, absolutely no mass, and that's a really great way to put it. Afro-Indigenous is a product of survival. It's African genetics that come over after European colonization. Thank you, Rabbiter. It is really hard. You have to do some real, well, okay, so I do have to state though, like I watch feeds, like I have, how everybody gets like like the algorithm listens to what you're searching for, and so they give you certain things. My algorithm knows that archaeology is my fascination, so every new archaeological find that's popped up within the last probably 2 years has popped up on my algorithm in my feed. And so some of it I don't have to dig that far for. Some of it I had to do a lot of digging for because I was like, I know this because Turtle Island Indigenous people say this. The elders taught me this, so I know this. So where can I show the proof for this so that I can give that to people? So some of it I had to dig. Nice, Rasta. Yes, everybody sends me archaeological stuff now that I'm on TikTok too. That's really awesome, which I just love. Afro-Indigenous is different than Indigenous in being dark of skin. Afro-Indigenous is having a mixture of African heritage and Turtle Island Indigenous heritage. There are many Indigenous Turtle Island groups who are dark of skin, but they are not of African descent. You see, especially along the equator in southern Turtle Island, that there are many groups that are very dark of skin, but you would not call them phenotypically African otherwise. Like they don't have 4C hair, some of their features might be phenotypically African, but um, those are features that aren't only seen in Africa. They're features that are seen in other spaces that have conditions that are similar, right? We do all come from Africa originally. Homo sapiens as a species originates in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. And then we get admixture from 7 other species other than us, 5 ghost species, 1 ghost species in Turtle Island, 1 ghost species in Australia, and 3 ghost species in the 2 groups within Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA. Everybody on the planet except for 2 groups in Africa has Neanderthal DNA. The 2 groups in Africa are the Kwe people in South Africa, the Abathawa, Abatwa, probably putting that word wrong. I apologize. Um, and the Oyo people in West Africa. Uh, if you do not know, the word that is being attributed to the large group of people, Kasa and Bantu, um, that does not pronounce right, and so I'm not going to pronounce it right, is a slur. We should not be using that word. So instead, we should be using the word kwe. If we cannot use the clicks, I can't click. But the kwe, and I can't say the second, kwe, and it's got to click quick, but it's Quayzan. But the second part, I can't click it. So Quay is the best way to say it if you cannot say it otherwise. And anything else is the word Khoisan is a slur. We should not be using that word. It was attributed to the people by somebody who was killing them. So Quay is the correct. And that info came directly from somebody who is Quay and who states this is a slur. Please don't use it anymore. The rest of my info I get from archaeological finds and information, unless it's something that's Turtle Island Indigenous history specific, which I get from Turtle Island Indigenous peoples that I love, who love me. Thank you. 1156. Okay, so when I'm using the word black here within, I'm talking about within Turtle Island. So here's the problem. African descent, correct. Not currently African, right? Because African is a nationality, right? So there needs to be a word that when we're talking about it as something specific that can be attributed, just like I need to be able to say white is a European thought, not a skin color, or European American, right? I need to be able to signify the specific, and that is the currently best specific when we're talking about people who are descendant of the African slave trade within the United States, okay, or within the Turtle Islands. Because it is an African descension, I would not claim to be Black or Sudanese, right? Like my grandmother was Sudanese, but I'm not because I'm not from the Sudan. I could look like this and live in the Sudan and have been born in the Sudan and claim Sudanese, right? Because Sudanese is a nationality. For some people, Turtle Island refers to all of North America. For some people, it refers to all of the globe, I believe. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to turn this for a second so that I can read back through. I didn't ever say that all African people have 4C hair. I said that Turtle Island indigenous people didn't have 4C hair, and that they, even if they were of dark of skin, they did not have other common African phenotypes. And I even did this because I acknowledge that no phenotype is specific to an area. And I actually acknowledge that no phenotype is specific to an area within that sentence structure when I said the common phenotypes that we commonly associate here, but we know that those phenotypes are across all places. So, um, but they did not have 4C hair here in the Turtle Islands. That does not mean that 4C hair is not here in the Turtle Islands at all. As a recessive gene, 4C hair can even be found in Scandinavia, and many Scandinavians actually have 4C hair. I know about 6 Scandinavians over the course of my lifetime who've had 4C hair, and a couple of Irish people who have had 4C hair with no Black heritage, no African heritage, right? Humans come from Asia. I can mute you now. I don't need to mute you. You can state that if you want to. I see no data that backs that up, and no one sees any data that backs that up. But you can absolutely believe that because some people have, spiritual history that tells them certain things. I'm not going to tell you that your creation stories are incorrect. I'm just trying to tell you what the DNA shows for groups. And we're not talking about Asians. We're talking about Turtle Island indigenous people and their DNA and their histories. So whether or not all people come from Asia is a totally different subject. We do know that the first Homo sapiens speciate black, dark of skin, speciate with dark eyes, and speciate with 4C hair. And this is a speciation that works. It works for all of us everywhere, except for the fact that they believe that the speciation for 4C hair, and this is written by a Black anthropologist who also has experience with hair work. And her studies show that 4C hair is actually to cool the scalp because it creates a lattice work where air can flow while creating a shade. And so we do know that we speciate like Homo erectus speciates with dark skin, dark eyes, and 4C hair, tall and lean in the broader area of South Africa. That's where Homo sapiens sapien comes from. We do mix with many other species as we come out of Africa and within Africa. So not all of the species within us speciate in Africa, but the species Homo sapiens sapien that we are all a part of does come from Africa and does start looking like what we currently associate as typically African. German is European. And we are stating that all Black people are not from slavery. Nobody's stating that. What we're stating is that there is a group of people who states that Indigenous Turtle Islanders are African, not Indigenous Turtle Islanders, and that what we know of today as people who are Black within America are not. We're not did not come here. They were here before Europeans were here, right? What we're stating is that is incorrect. There are plenty of people here within the United States, within the Americas, who are African who did not come over on the slave trade. And this is why I actually just specified we are talking about a difference of if you are in the United States and you are in the Americas and you have come here as the result of the transatlantic slave trade, then you generally are Black. Because if you have come here from Africa as an immigrant, after that, you are African American, right? I have a friend from Kenya who is African American. They got here at 16 years old. They are African American, right? Whereas somebody who is not of an African nationality, is not African American. They are Black with an American. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't call yourself African American. Call yourself whatever you want. I'm not stating differently. I'm stating that I've had African American people tell me that's Black. I am African American. I am directly from Africa. Africa is a nationality, right? Well, it's a continent. There are several different nationalities within the continent, to be specific. Ducray, were you asking me to put a name in chat, honey? If you were, can you let me know what it was? And there does seem to be a specific link between a fuck if my words work. There is a link between Turtle Islanders and the South Pacific. Current studies are showing that they think that the Turtle Islanders got here by a Pacific boat, South Pacific boat route. So that's the latest studies. That study is also on my website. I can. So this is going to be the name that we don't want to be stating anymore. This is oh shit, that's the wrong spelling. I tried to change the spelling, but it wouldn't let me. We know that this is done by the colonizer that was killing them. This is the name that he gave them, and so they would appreciate it if we're not using it. The current correct is going to be in with this. Well, not current correct. The correct is in with this, and I'm going to ignore the last part of that. It auto corrected on me. It's my phone hates me. I apologize. Sorry. I won't throw the phone. I swear. I swear. Okay. So Quay is the correct pronunciation if you cannot use the click, which the click is demonstrated by the X in the last part of that word. And I cannot click. I can roll my R's. I grew up speaking Hebraic or Hebrew and Aramaic, but I cannot click. So I'm not going to do that one. Quay is considered a good pronunciation if you are unable to click, so that you're not using the slur that is given based on somebody killing them, naming them. Yes, don't say the second part if you can't click. And then it just becomes the Quay people. Not anymore, Andreas. So the South Pacific study just suggests that there were a few isolated contact events between a few islands near Tahiti and Ecuador, as opposed to a large-scale population event. So my understanding is that was what we were looking at, but now they're looking at the Denisovian DNA, and the Denisovian DNA seems to be isolated in the southeast, the southeast of Asia, the Pacific Island populations of Asia, and Australasia. So Australia. This is where we see Denisovian DNA. And because of this, they're now looking at, well, they didn't go over and live down here and then go up and over, especially since this isn't, ice free at the time. So it must be this. And if you look at the Pacific Islands, a lot of that was above water, right? There's a huge continent down there that during the last ice age was above water. Right. So there is a lot more possibility of a migration at the end of the last ice age through the Pacific Islands than there would be now, even. There's just one article on it because there's been only 2 articles that have come out within the last 6 months. This is really new, and it's all based on the Denisovian DNA. It was just something that was like, "Ha, ha, ha, I told you. Ha, 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 I told you." So, I was like, "That's really big." I'm so glad you're looking at that now as a mainstream, right? But it is on there. It's just one of the articles on there. I do have some stuff I got to do. So I'm going to hold space again, or continue to hold space until 1 p.m. So 45 minutes from now. We are going to stay in here for another 45 minutes. Again, if anybody would like to speak, if anybody has questions, this is not about me. I'm more than willing to give knowledge, the knowledge that I have, but this is a space for others peoples to, or for people to be talking in a safe space about this and to make sure that they're having correct information about this, so that we can all move forward in a very positive, unified way as two different communities, right? Um, our or as two communities that really shouldn't be two communities, and some of us are kind of mixed within those communities, right? And so, uh, hello, salty mayo sapien. I love that new name you've got going on there. So I absolutely am welcoming anybody who wants to speak on this, especially if you are indigenous to Turtle Island or Afro-Indigenous to Turtle Island. Well, Afro-Indigenous implies both, right? Or if you are Black American, and I specify Black American just because it is a very unique experience, right? And a very unique thing that's interacting with this, right? And who would like to either ask questions or talk about things that you think might actually disprove this so that we can discuss them. I'm more than willing to do that as long as it's a discussion and not an argument. Um, so I mean, I'm totally open. Um, and again, this is space that I'm being asked to hold. It is not space that I chose to do. I mean, not that I'm not willing and happily able to, but it is not an idea that I decided to do for myself. This is not about my ego. Uh, not that life isn't about my ego frequently. I'm not stating that I don't have an ego, but this is not my space today. This is being space held for others today. So if you have a need to express or words that you would like to speak, please let me know, and I will do my best to bring you up. I did I? I don't think I did. I think it's currently. It might be okay. So let me go ahead and turn that back on. So there's that option. How does Hispaniola and Haiti connect to this? Um, Carla, can you specify what you mean by how does Hispaniola and Haiti connect to this? Are you talking about how does Haitian connect to Afro-Indigenous, or how does Hispaniola as a space and Hispaniola is Haiti, isn't it? I'm like I said, I'm kind of globally, or not globally, geographically challenged, and I want to make sure that I am answering that question correctly. Okay, so how does Hispaniola Haiti connect to Afro-Indigeneity? Actually, Hispaniola and Haiti would be a space of a lot of Afro-Indigeneity. So Afro-Indigenous means like that. My only problem with that is that there, I want to make sure people can get over to TikTok, or not to TikTok, to YouTube, so that either they can comment or in case I get logged off, or not logged off, but blocked. I get blocked all the time, or banned. So in Haiti, we have a mixture of the slave trade happening. There's a lot of the slave trade happening there, and there are still indigenous people within that space. Actually, when we look at the documentations of early Europeans in that area, we see that there's a lot of mixture of different indigenous groups, as well as bringing in that early slave trade that's happening. And this is where we're getting Afro-Indigenous, because again, Afro-Indigenous is real. Afro-Indigenous. Thank you, Erica. Afro-Indigenous means that you have African heritage and Turtle Island Indigenous heritage. Maybe your grandfather was Black and your mother was Indigenous, or grandmother was Indigenous, right? So that's what Afro-Indigenous means. It means it's a combination of those two things. It doesn't mean Afro. It doesn't mean that it's a combination of two different groups of people. It's not a single group of people, if that makes sense, right? So it is having African heritage and indigenous heritage. It is not a heritage of its own. It is a mixture of two heritages. Um, so we see actually that there is a lot of Afro-Indigenous, to my knowledge, within Haiti. And that is because of the fact that we do see a lot of an indigenous mixture within Haiti, and a lot of mixture of African heritage within Haiti. And that makes sense. But the Afro-Indigenous people that we would see within Haiti, unless they're stating Afro-Indigenous as in they have decided that they are Aboriginal, like, unless they've decided that they, unless it's a Wabu thought process, right? Anything that states Afro-Indigenous is supposed to mean, it might not mean, somebody might be stating it in a different manner, but Afro-Indigenous specifically is supposed to mean having African heritage and Indigenous heritage, not a singular heritage. Black people are not indigenous to Turtle Island over Turtle Island Indigenous people. And I don't know why you would think that Black people should trump people that are Turtle Island Indigenous. That doesn't make sense to me, right? There is not a whole lot of significant tie between our Indigenous Turtle Islander DNA and current Asian DNA. There is knowledge that we traveled through that space, but like we're not genetically tied to them anymore. We left. Like you and your sister go to two different spaces, and 3,000 years from now, you and your sister's great great grandchildren are not the same people. You're two different peoples, even though you both came from the same mother, right? Pre-colonization, so it's not colonization to move into a space. Colonization is specifically taking your government and imposing it on another space's government. That's what the word colonization means. So if nobody is in a space, it's not colonization, it's migration. Just stating like the actual meanings of the words. Colonized is I impose my government on another people's government and put little outposts of my people. Okay. So if I'm putting little outposts of my people and my government into another people's space, that's colonization. Migration into a space is not colonization. So the Americas were settled by Turtle Island Indigenous people originally, and that is why they are indigenous to the Turtle Islands because they adapted here for 30,000 years. And then about 500 years ago, the Europeans came in. But they were here for as long as the Europeans were in Europe. After 16,000 years ago, there is a disconnect between Asia and Turtle Island. If you're talking DNA, absolutely, though there is actually backwards migration. We see that the X1 mitochondrial DNA leaves Turtle Island and goes into Siberia from the Turtle Islands, which would be Arctic migration to my thought process, looking at the Arctic Circle and them all being Arctic peoples. The land bridge closes at 12,000 years ago, though not 16,000 years. So the last knowledge that they have of a disconnect between those two spaces ends 12,000 years ago. Banning, of course, or not talking, of course, about all the boat routes because there's the Kelp Highway across the northern that's 8,000 years ago. And now we're looking at the South Pacific being way earlier, being the earliest that we would see. Okay, so you coming in and stating stuff without evidence. We don't do things without evidence. And the reason that we don't do things without evidence is because when you're going to tell another person that they're wrong about their own family line, you have to have evidence to tell them they're wrong about their own family line. Otherwise, you're just an ass. If say I'm completely and only Turtle Island Indigenous, okay? I'm not, obviously, but say I'm completely and only Turtle Island Indigenous. And if I tell you that my people have lived here for 30,000 years, you don't get to tell me differently. That's an asshole move. Why would you think that you can tell me what my heritage and my history is? Now, that does not mean that it goes the other way. If I'm fully Turtle Island Indigenous and you, coming from another space, decide to tell me that you are the one that is Turtle Island Indigenous, even though we have plenty of documentation that you came here later, you don't get to tell me that you're Turtle Island Indigenous when my knowledge and my evidence and being here 30,000 years is backed up in all spaces. There is no evidence that states that Turtle Island Indigenous people are not Turtle Island Indigenous people. None. The only thing that states it is some asshole's book from the 70s with no proof. who was trying to take over what he thought were an extinct group of people. We're not extinct. We're still here. So if you think that you're going to tell me that my knowledge of my history is taught to me by my elders that goes back thousands and thousands of years, and I am speaking for myself, no matter my color right now, because my elders taught me history. Whether or not I claim a nation doesn't fucking matter. Whether or not a nation claims me, I sat in, okay? And the elders have taught me. And if you're going to tell me that my elders are wrong, you better have some facts, because I'm coming with facts that my elders are right. So you don't just get to spout your shit. Spouting your shit is harmful, and you should try to be a better person. It's also mighty white. I don't care your skin color. Again, mighty white. Coming in and telling people that they are not who the fuck they are is mighty white of you, isn't it? Colonize, colonize, colonize. Hey, subtle. So let me go back through. This is emotional for me. I'm sorry. This is hard for me because I don't. How can I tell from DNA that ancestry didn't happen earlier anywhere in the Americas? Ancestry of what? So from DNA tells us pre-contact finds. So uh, like DNA testing the mummies in South America, DNA testing bodies that were excavated, right? DNA testing tells us that Turtle Island indigenous people actually are here for several generations, hundreds of generations, but it also tells us that they went through Asia to get here from the Denisovian DNA that we see in Southeast Asia and that we see within Turtle Island indigenous people. It also gives us a ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous people that we don't see anywhere else on the planet. It is unique to the Turtle Island indigenous people. All of this stuff states that Turtle Island indigenous people are not African. And they are indigenous to this space, and African people are not indigenous to this space. African people are indigenous to Africa. Beautiful space. If you haven't, I mean, most of us haven't had the opportunity to be, and I haven't. I'm poor and broke and disabled, and it's hard. But Africa, from everything I've heard, and from many people I know who have been there, is an extremely gorgeous space and has extremely rich heritage. And there are plenty of peoples within the United States who can help you learn that heritage, even if you can't go, right? There are plenty of people who are recent from Africa who can help you learn that heritage, right? But it is its own heritage. And Turtle Island indigenous people have their own heritage, and it dates back 30,000 years, and they get to have that. Trying to take that from them is ridiculously rude. As long as you hide the bodies, it's migration. Got it. Well, they didn't hide the bodies because we haven't found bodies even through DNA or even through like what do you think was here first? As long as they hide the bodies, it's migration, which means that you're stating that there was a group here before Turtle Island indigenous people got here, which actually I have stated. I do believe that Homo erectus came here and speciated, and that's the ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous people, so that they came here and that they mixed with that species. We see that, right? So again, we're looking at, if that's the case, then we're looking at a species that speciates here. So how much more indigenous can you get than that, right? Or originates here, right? And so that would mean that part of Turtle Island indigenous DNA is DNA that originates on this continent that never was anywhere else and has never been anywhere else. And therefore, again, Turtle Island indigenous people are Turtle Island indigenous people, and this is their space, and it's been their space for over 30,000 years. It remains their space. It should be their space land back. Oh, love. No, I'm not going to talk about pre-colonial trade routes and corns and stuff like that. Just because of the fact that I'm not focusing on teaching culture, right? We're not. I mean, it's not my space to teach culture. The Siberian Mongolian DNA isn't like them having that DNA. It's the Siberian Mongolians having Turtle Island indigenous DNA. I just want to state. So the mitochondrial DNA X starts in Turtle Island and is found in Siberia, which means that it starts here and then goes to Siberia. And that's what I'm talking about with that, I believe, Arctic route. Like we're looking at Arctic people, right? And so Egyptians. So Egypt is a vast range of space. Uh, Egyptians are classified as Caucasian, uh, and because of all of North Africa is actually classified as Caucasian. Uh, Northern European is not Caucasian. That's Northern European. Caucasian is in the Levant, in the Middle East and Africa. That's Caucasian. Anyways, so it is classified as Caucasian, but there are different countries along the Nile, right, that were once Egypt because Kemet, not Egypt, because Kemet conquered all of those countries and brought them into the fold of Kemet. And so Kemet is a wide range of different colors, like different phenotypes, different peoples. Kemet, yes, that's correct spelling. With Kemet being such a wide range of phenotypical peoples, you are seeing that it has Ethiopian, you're seeing it has very far north Nile based Delta African, right? And so within this, you are seeing that, yes, well, it's classified as Caucasian, that there are many people that we associate as being phenotypically Black within the Egyptian or Kemet borders. Well, Egypt was ancient Egypt. Um, Currently, I believe Egypt is all classified as being Caucasian, but I do not know. Hey, brown girl. It's good to see you, love. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn them back on for a couple and probably turn them off so I can answer again. And again, like I stated, if there are people within here who are Turtle Island Indigenous who would like to come up and speak on this, people up here who are Afro Indigenous who would like to come and speak on this, people here who are, and again, I'm going to use the word that works specifically for this specifically Black American people, people who are here within the United States, who are of or in Canada, who are of African descent or Australian descent, right? Who would like to talk about questions or, try and figure out different things that they have heard about how Black people were here before Turtle Island Indigenous people were here. Turtle Island Indigenous people don't exist. And so maybe I can help debunk some of that stuff for you and try and help you understand some of that stuff. I'm totally willing to have those conversations. Again, don't tell me I'm wrong unless you have some evidence because I'm bringing forth evidence and I've got it all, right? So Santa B, you did not. I know. I'm not even sure I saw what you said, Santana, honey. You're fine. You're fine. Absolutely. And that's the biggest problem with all of this is that now so many of us get almost like I remember the first time I saw somebody that I did not know that they, what they meant was part African and part indigenous, and they tried to tell me Afro indigenous, and as if it was that thought process of indigenous people not existing, I thought, and I was like, oh, whoa, 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 right? Like, so many of us, like we're like, oh my god, right? Like, why would you do that? Until we understand, and that unfortunately really I feel creates a very harsh space to be Afro indigenous in. It's already a harsh space to be mixed. As a mixed person, I really understand this. It's already a space where you don't really belong in any space, right? And but if you're Afro Indigenous, as in you know that you're part Indigenous and part African, right? And you're claiming Afro Indigenous because you're trying to honor both of those heritages. And then you've got people over here going, "What are you, a Wabu?" Like that's got to be hard, right? That creates hard for that space specifically. It erases Indigenous space and it erases the slave trade space and it erases Black history here within the United States, or within the Americas. But it's got to be specifically hard to be Afro Indigenous within that space, right? Where one group, where your Indigenous group is thinking that maybe you're trying to erase them, and where you have your Black side going, well, what about this, right? That's got to be a very difficult space, honestly. Yes, and we do have to very frequently be responsible with how we speak. I try to be, even though you specify native looking people, but which is real. Yeah, it's hard not to get your back up over the erasure, right? It's hard not to be upset. I mean, I don't know if you heard it, but when I was talking about how many people, I literally sat down and calculated how many people per day Columbus had to have killed, and it was men, women, and children. The only distinction that Columbus ever made with the Taino and who he killed was, if I am harming this child, will it get the parent to talk? Right? That's the only distinction he ever made. He didn't care, right? And so, like, 31,000, 3,100, 3,900 people a day means that what we're looking at is men, women, and children. Like, it hurts to say, it hurts to understand and to acknowledge and realize, right? And so, when we're dealing with erasure, it also, it gets that backup, right? It's like, oh my god, like, oh, like, why would you do that to me? Like, enough has happened, enough, right? Haplogroup 2, that's male. I've never really followed the male haplogroups, and that's probably why I don't know enough. But you're right. Though uh I thought Fiscography was talking, and Fiscography had said Q originates here, actually. So I would have to look into it, but I do believe, like, it might be another one. Fiscography is really good on DNA in the Turtle Islands. She's way more. I know about the ghost DNA because that's an archaeological thing, but she's way more into the haplogroup DNA than I understand. What did Columbus say about the indigenous people when he arrived here? He actually related them he said that they looked more like people from India than they did from people from Africa. He states that they're darkest skin, but their hair is extremely straight and thick and long. And that it is cut over the front of their faces, and it's almost like a horse's tail in the bristle of the cut. And he states that the tone of the skin is more Indian, as in, he doesn't use the word India, because the word India does not exist at this time, right? Um, no, it's not supposed to be for only subscribers. It might be that we're not following. Can you speak out and I can find you? And I can probably uh choke. Oh God, I don't want to try and pronounce that because I will get it wrong. I can see it already. If you will state your name, I can see you and I can. There you are. Got you. Hold on a second. Let me pull you up. I think. Hmm. You might need to follow me for it to guess access, unfortunately, because I've tried to invite and it won't let me invite. Aha, let me see. No, it says no guest access. Why not? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, so I think I may have just changed it. Can you try and see if it will? Hmm. It's not even allowing me to. Columbus came to the Taino. I'm not sure why it's not letting me invite you. It says that you don't have guest access when I'm trying to invite you. It does say that we're friends now, so I'm not sure why. And when I try and pull it up, it doesn't put you on the guests. I've turned it on so that you can actually, like, ask to come up, like you can invite yourself. Oh, I'm banned from going live all the time. I feel that. I was wondering if that was it. Like, I piss people off all the time and people ban me from going live. I'm sorry. Um, I would absolutely love to welcome you up otherwise. But I feel that one because I'm like that all the time. It's always like that in my lives. So uh I apologize. Johnny, where did I come from? I'm everywhere. Like, everywhere. I was raised Turtle Island Indigenous, and I have Turtle Island Indigenous connections by blood as well. Although I was not raised within the Turtle Island indigenous blood connections I have, and I do not belong to a nation. Um, and then I also have Sudanese heritage, um, as well as pretty much everywhere. Like there's South American heritage, there's Romani heritage, there's Asian heritage, there's very obviously Scandinavian and Celtic heritage, Sami heritage. It's pretty much everywhere. Who do I say is here first? Turtle Island indigenous people have been here for roughly 30,000 years. We do see that there is evidence of Homo erectus being here before Turtle Island indigenous people. Absolutely. And always welcome, always welcome. And after you're off your ban, if you would like to come back during one of my lives and speak about what you wanted to speak about today, you are always welcome as well. Just let me know. I'm absolutely more than willing to provide a space for you to be able to platform off of, or whatever it is that you need to get out a message or to speak, because that's important to me. So if you come back in after your live band is over, I can, even if it's not the topic, we can open it back up to that topic for me. You are so welcome. Thank you so much, 56 Pit. No, colonization is when a government is already in place and another government comes in. So all people have migrated, but not all people have colonized. You have to replace another people or overtake another people for it to be colonization. Apple, I am not seeing the question. There's 300 people in here asking me questions. How am I supposed to see it? It does help if you at me. Where does my family originate? I just told you where my family originates. Cochimiqui? If I'm not pronouncing that right, please let me know. It's important to me. Cochimiqui, uh, absolutely, anytime. Oh, okay, and I did think that I was in the middle of describing that. So Columbus describes the indigenous people as looking like people from, he doesn't call it India because it's not, it's called Hindustan or Hindustan at the time, right? But he describes them as looking like people from India of skin tone with extremely straight hair. And he describes it as actually being chopped off across the front and being almost bristly like horsehair among the Taino people. He does describe them as painting themselves as white and black and red paint. But he describes their skin tone as specifically being more, and he literally states, more alike people from, and he doesn't use the word India, though it's translated modernly as India. Uh, uh, or it's stated as India in modern renditions of it, but specifically from Hindustan, instead of people from Africa. And he literally states they don't look African, like not African. So they're literally not African. Like it's literally that specifically phrased is stated not African. So skin tone does vary based on location within the Turtle Islands. We see that within the Turtle Islands, if you're a part of the Arctic spaces, your skin tone is going to be lighter. If you're a part of the equatorial spaces, your skin tone is going to be darker. We do see that there is an undertone. No matter what range it is, there is still that copper undertone. Just like we see within Asia, there's still a yellow undertone. And that undertone is specifically different from Australia or Africa, right? Turtle Island is the word for North America. Many different nations along the East Coast use this, obviously not the English version. And this is an English translation of a phrase used in many different languages across the East Coast, spoken in many different languages, the English translation. And it has become almost a global wordage for North American indigenous people. They're not dark like African, though. Okay, and so this is where we get that specific again. They are as dark as sub-Saharan African, yes, but the undertone being copper, as opposed to the undertone being almost like a chocolatey, like almost sometimes I can see almost a blue to it, right? Like almost a blue black sometimes, right? So compared to that undertone, there is a completely different undertone. And so that undertone means that, well, the melanin amount may be the same as the melanin amount in somebody in sub-Saharan Africa. The tone of the skin is still slightly different. And Africans are not the only dark-skinned people on the planet. Absolutely. So the current people who we deem Black within America are African descendants, are descendants of Africans who were brought, or sometimes of Australians who were brought over here on the slave trade or who have come after the slave trade, but they were not here before 1492. I am not going to state that everybody who is Black in America is from Africa, because some people who are Black in America, and again, Black is a statement of what we're visualizing as a phenotype, right? Like it's not a race, race doesn't exist, right? What we're deciding by our own perception being Black in America, right? Black does not exist in Turtle Island prior to 1492. Not what we're calling Black. Okay. And no, Black does not mean just Africa. It is also like what we look at as phenotypically being Black. Um, if you would like to come up, please let me know who you are before you try and pop up, just so that I know. Because if I don't know who you are, I might not pop you up unless something specifically tells me about what I see who you are. Black does not come over here before 1493. And 1492 is when Columbus sails the ocean blue. Okay, but, well, there is no race, and where Black is not a specific ethnicity, how do the people here in Turtle Island, have no connection to either Africa or Australia prior to 1492, after 30,000 years ago? Between 50,000 years ago and 1492, Turtle Island Indigenous people are their own unique group of people who have no connection to Africa, Australia, or Asia at all, at all, at all. They may have once been through there 50,000 years ago. Is somebody asking to go live, or is it just popping up? Okay. Indigenous people are not part of the lost tribes of Israel. Indigenous Australians are Black. Okay, let's go ahead and do this for a hot second just so that I can go through this. I'll turn them back on in a minute just so I can go through them. John Hawkins has all the knowledge that I've had. Otherwise, maybe some of the knowledge is too new for John Hopkins, but all the knowledge that I have either comes from Turtle Island Indigenous elders, or it comes from articles that John Hopkins has, like, that are approved through the academic community. Again, the articles are all on the widdaord.com website. So John Hopkins isn't saying anything different than what I'm saying. Sorry, they're just not. What are my credentials? I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist, and I am Turtle Island Indigenous. Those are enough credentials for this conversation. Where are the ships now? We've found plenty of them. And if you are trying to state that the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen, that's problematic. Why are you acting like a white supremacist and letting the white people off what they fucking did? The transatlantic slave trade was a horror perpetuated by the Europeans that stole people from their homeland and disconnected them from their families and then tried to kill them off. Why are you allowing Europeans to decide that it was an indentured servitude, that they brought people over so that they could have a better future, when they killed them the fuck off and horrifically? Why? Why are you helping the Europeans ignore the transatlantic slave trade? Why are you allowing white supremacists to decide that they've never done anything wrong? Why are you refusing to hold white people accountable for white fucking action? The transatlantic slave trade happened. Look up the Clotilde. Not only did the transatlantic slave trade happen and we found the ships, but we've also found the fortress that they were transported out of, right? We've also found islands where you can see the entire island is covered with shells because of the fact that the slaves were put on that island and it was the only thing that they could eat while they were waiting transportation out of Africa. Maybe you should look to the Black leaders within the Black community here in the United States who are trying to bring forth knowledge on the transatlantic slave trade instead of erasing the transatlantic slave trade, allowing Europeans to get off. People with melanin, melanated is not a race, nor is it an ethnicity. Yes. I maybe have already addressed this. So melanation, we all have melanation. It doesn't matter what color what color your skin is. Everybody has melanation. Some of us just have a higher concentration of melanation in our skin. So melanation in itself is not a race. Having a higher amount of melanation, race doesn't exist. Having a higher amount of melanation depends on what space on the globe that your people have lived in for 100 generations, because 100 generations gives an adaptation of skin tone to adapt to the area that you are in. We all, as a race, started out extremely dark, sub-Saharan, and as not as a race, but like as a species, started out extremely dark, sub-Saharan, and it is that migration across the globe, that adaptation of 100 generations in a space, and that indigeneity within spaces that adjusts the way the melanin shows in our skin. It is not loss of melanin; it is just the lack of the density of melanin. I don't know what it would be a false statement of fact, Apple, but I stated everything I've got, and I've got the backups on it all. They were Jews who were captive in Africa. That's why they sold them as slaves, because they knew no, 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 no. Africa is Islamic at this time, where it's not Christian. The first Christian church in the world is in Ethiopia. Okay, the original Christians are in Africa. Um, and Africa, other than Ethiopia, and the Christian church within Ethiopia at this time, is predominantly Islamic. And Mansa Musa is the king in the 1300s, and he documents everything he does. He goes all over Africa. He travels to Mecca. The Islamic people writ their shit that far back. Like, the Islamic people have always writ their shit. And he documents everything he does. And in that documentation of everything he does, he never documents leaving Africa or Mecca. He didn't come to the Turtle Islands. He is King Midas, and the king before him that is documented, or everybody wants to claim, came to the Turtle Islands. There's not a documentation of him coming to the Turtle Islands. There's a documentation of him disappearing. That's it. Just because the dude disappeared does not mean that he came here. It'll let me invite you, choke me. Coach me. Sorry. Saw the words wrong in my head.
I believe it's how it's pronounced, but it means like dreaming wolf, I believe.
I saw that part. I'm trying to say it right, but I saw the words wrong in my head as I was saying it, as I was pulling it up, and I apologize for that.
I just wanted to get on here and give you a little thing about that slave thing. A lot of these people will say that the slave trade happened now. Now they're not denying it, but they're saying that they were the indigenous people and the slave trade went the other way. And that's why there's no more left. It's this new theory. I was looking for a penny. I couldn't find one, but I got a copper staple, and I just want to prove something real quick. They were talking about the color of the people. Like, I don't know if you can see it, minus the flash. We have the red undertone that copper is based off. It's simple, and this is my winter color. So,
yep.
But I'll let Coach Lee jump on. Just wanted to give you that idea before they start trying to prove fact check and stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't know they decided to reverse it because their proof wasn't working, so they decided to change their proof. Welcome, welcome.
Kentimopilia. How do you love yourself? How do you take care of yourself? My name's Kuchimiki Quitlashli. I'm known by that name by my friends, but my Tonali name is Yei Akat, which is Nahuatl for three reed. And I just appealed the the ban right now. Surprisingly, I'm back on it. But yeah, I got banned yesterday with the live with Brown Pride Girl concerning ethnocentric rhetoric. Well, as you all seen, there's this lady, I forgot her name, ethnocentric extremist, and another ethnocentric extremist that's male, that they're trying to excuse this lady's remarks on residential school children. And not only do they spread misinformation, but they were mocking uh, how our people died and all they went through with laughter. Uh, and that made me really angry. And they were asking why were kids put in residential schools? So I went on a live to answer that, and I will give a source too. The children in residential schools were put in those schools because they annihilated 95% of our population through systematic violence and the cowardly use of smallpox uh, as a bioweapon, and the remaining 5% still had how do you say, like, entitlement to the land and to the resources. And for white supremacy, it was not tolerable. So what they did is put the remaining 5% of our children that were children in residential schools, and they went through rape, through they starved them, through psychological abuse, through physical abuse, and even death to that extent, to the point that we're finding our children in residential schools. And for these people, I mean, at that point, my point was not debunking any of the rhetoric because I've been debunking ethnocentric extremists for 8 years, and I have concluded that these people are gone. They're beyond any uh, grasp of reality, because the things that they push, they're extremely ridiculous to that extent, to what kind of mind or what set of mind believes these things, right? So they're to me they're gone after 8 years. I tried reasoning with them at first. I tried being academic with them, uh, and it doesn't work. It's still the same rhetoric that's been spreading year after year. If you look at their content, it's all the same thing. It gets that it gets old. But when they decided to talk about residential schools, that was a reason enough for me to come back uh, with this topic. This topic has brought me a lot of grief. Uh, I have lost a lot of friends. Our community gets divided because some people portray people that are debunking ethnocentric extremists as being anti-black. The black community starts seeing us as being anti-black, and it is just a circus. And this circus was prompted by white supremacy. All this rhetoric that they spreading is from white supremacy, as you were stating earlier, uh, that they quote white supremacy. And while we are in a circus show, white supremacy is and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about white supremacy as a state of mind. I'm talking straight out white supremacists, because white supremacy is pushed by white supremacists. That is white people, racist white people. And while we were in this circus, white supremacists in the back laughing at us and being entertained by the infighting, by the fighting of black and brown, or whatever you want to refer to as our people, African people and indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere.
I agree. It does nothing but buoy their arguments, and it does nothing but allow them to refuse accountability for action, and it does nothing but maintain their power, because we can't stop that as long as we're fighting among each other, right? That's that whole othering thing. Like, colonialism just depends on the ability to make you hate everybody but the people that are trying to kill you.
Exactly. Uh, exactly. And I also wanted to, uh, what you, what some people in the comments were asking about South America. You know, people. How do you say this? Just because English is my second language, but people confuse indigenous people of south of the border as being people of South America, right? Which is not true. We're part of the North American continent, what you call Turtle Island. We call it Anahuac. In other languages, they call it Abyayala. And in South America, people in that area, that occupy well, the original people that occupy that space, they call that Tawantinsuyu. I believe it's Quechua for the 4 points, right? So I also wanted to answer to some of the comments in your live in regards to
Thank you.
that.
Thank you. Like I said, it's hard for me to uh I'm very cautious about speaking indigenous language wrong, right? To me, that's hard. Like, I can't. I feel insulting if I speak things wrong, right? And so I really try and make sure that I'm not. And so I always appreciate being told again how to do it correctly, so that I can put it in my head and double it down and repeat it to myself and repeat it to myself, so I can get to the point that I can say it correctly without being insulting, with doing honor, you know? So,
Yeah, but I mean, it's understandable. When it comes to other languages, I struggle myself. But I think we need to get comfortable in just trying to say it. It doesn't matter if we say it wrong. And that's why sometimes in another accounts I have it as dreaming group, so people can know who I am. You know what I mean?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's important too. Um, and yeah, I've heard the Abiyala. God, I didn't see it probably.
Yes.
And I've heard that before. So that is North America then. I thought that was what somebody had told me was South America.
No, that is North America. I forgot the nation, which I'm gonna have to relearn. But yeah, that is North America. With like for the whole Western Hemisphere, we call it Semanawak, which is Nahuatl for the one land surrounded by water. It's a metaphor, or it's a metaphor. It can be used in different contents when it's describing like one universe, right? Uh, but in this content, we use it as the one land surrounded by water. It's a land with no artificial borders, uh, and it's to promote unity within all indigenous nations of the Western Hemisphere. Uh, and so we to refer to the whole Western Hemisphere, we call it Semanawak.
That's beautiful. I like that one. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your words. And I know the video you're talking about, that was hurtful. I watched that, and I haven't found like the original. Like, I don't know the original. I saw it off of a couple of other people's, and it wasn't tagged, which I totally understand. Um, so I haven't found the original, but I've been really that's was really and I think actually the original that she did was deleted since, like, it's off, I think, when I tried to follow it back, but, that was really problematic in every level. Not only was it the laughter for me, the laughter over what was an extremely traumatic experience for children, especially as we're pulling people or we're in the middle of for the last 2 years, we have excavated like something like 15,000 babies, right, from schools over the last 2, 3 years. And how you can laugh over that is really just horrific for me.
It's inhumane. I mean, the people they're not getting the grasp. Or I don't know
Yeah.
what state of mind can you be at to be so cold about it. It's beyond my grasp. It's so infuriating. That's. I mean, I was on a live yesterday before uh, Brown Pride Girl. Uh, that person that made that video about residential schools was hosting it, and they wouldn't let me up because I wanted to tell them a piece of my mind. At that point, I don't want to debunk anything. I want to tell them how their inhumanity, how they're exposing their inhumanity, and they wouldn't let me up until I went to Brown Girl Pride, Brown Pride Girl, my bad, live, which I got kicked out by a infiltrator, a troll account, pretending to be one of my friends. I don't know if you know the political shola, which
Yes.
they were pretending to be her, uh, and I got reported. And another thing that we were talking about on that live is how indigenous is a term that is used worldwide, and I agree with that on that aspect, and that's hence and point. That's why I don't use indigenous. In my particular case, I use Nicantlaca, which is a term is the first term that was used by any indigenous nations to say that I'm native, right? That I'm the natural, I'm the original. When the Spaniards came and they asked the Nahua, well, who are you people? Our people answered Nicantlaca, which is as a literal translation for people here, but metaphorically it means indigenous, right? Because Nahuatl is it's spoken as a metaphoric language, as a poetic language, and you can find this source in the conquest after the now no the Nahuas after the conquest. What's the author? I forgot the author. In the Florentine Codex, which is the most important source that we can find. The first time that indigenous people use the term native, right? Which is the Florentine Codex, and also on a dictionary. I forgot what it's. I have it all on my Facebook, on my TikTok account. That it was written in the 1500s, and to be exact, in the 1580, which is like not not long after the Spanish quote unquote conquest, right?
Yeah.
Because the Spanish didn't conquer us. What decimated us, it was smallpox. It was killed in this source you can find in the American Holocaust by David E. Standard, where 23 million Anahuaca, which includes all Nahuas and all 65 different indigenous nations, were affected by smallpox, and the Mexica civilization being ground zero for this disease, right? So that's why I don't use indigenous, because it's a global term. I use a term that can reflect who I am as Nahua, uh, and Nahuatl speaking person, which is Nicantlaca, uh, or I use Anahuaca, which is Nahuatl for people from the land surrounded by water. That does not I do not appropriate anybody's nations, right? Since I'm not a connected indigenous person, I have been, but in Mexico, in order for you to claim an indigenous nation, you have to be an active member.
Yeah.
And since I stopped being an active member, I can no longer claim that nation, right? Which for me it was Rarumari or quote unquote Tarahumara. I don't have lineage, but since I was an active member, I was accepted into that nation until I stopped uh, working in that community. Then I could no longer claim that nation or my lineage, which my lineage is Mexicanero and Wirarica. Mexicanero from my mom's side, uh, and Wirarica from my dad's side. And since I can't claim any nation affiliation, I say I'm Anahuaca, which it can be translated to Native American because the North, the North American continent, we know it as America, right? And we know it as an Anahuac. So I say I'm Anahuaca. In other words, I'm from the American continent, and specifically in my language, I'm from the land surrounded by water, which is what you call Turtle Island.
I love that. Thank you so much for that.
And yeah, so
That
and
is
that's when I got reported when I was speaking about that. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the space. Thank you for allowing me to be on your life and for adding me in your friendship as mutuals. And now I'm gonna sit back and enjoy your life and learn a lot from you guys. I see that you know a lot, and I like to talk, but I also like to learn. So I'm gonna go back in the comment section and learn from you.
absolutely. I'm actually going to be learning from you. I will be exploring your TikTok after we're done with this live because I haven't heard of the Florentine Codex and I would like to take a look at that. And
Yes.
thank you for the wealth of information and the love in which you give it to all of us, because that is information given in love and given in the desire for forward movement, and that is so appreciated. I want to thank you immensely for coming up and speaking. Also for speaking on the video that has come out, because that was very damaging, I think, to a lot of people within the community. The laughter was very damaging for a lot of us. Um, and speaking on that is a huge thing, and I appreciate that. And for being part of our community, that's truth is often banned because people are too afraid of it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Initially in your lot, my face, my heart, Totaske later.
Thank you. With so much love. Thank you. For me, actually, that's I think part of the reason why I was asked to do this is because that has come across. I did not know about the live yesterday. I did see the video itself on Brown Girl Pride's thing and on Odin Scoden's, and so had known that it was out. And like I said, I had not been able to follow it back to get to a space where I could actually address the issue, which. The laughter is the overwhelming problem with the issue. There's also the problem that she literally read the last sentence and ignored the first sentence that states that it's indigenous children being taken into white boarding schools, right? Like, or into white residential schools. Like, that this is about colonization, and that they were teaching them Western farming, right? Like, why are you laughing over the idea of them teaching Western farming? Of course, they didn't understand Western farming. We didn't use Western farming. Western farming is harmful. We use positive, honorable harvest tactics. Why would we have understood European farming? Of course, we needed training in European farming tactics, right? That doubles down on the fact that we were indigenous here, that we didn't have that shit, that we're not from there, right? But the laughter was the horrific part. And the laughter was the horrific part because people don't seem to understand this is not in our past. Residential schools were closed in 98. 98. And there are still residential schools open today. They're just not supposed to be led by the Catholic Church, though some of them still are. Okay. We are currently in the last 2 years. The last count that I knew of was 15,000. We just found 2,000 babies that we haven't even excavated and been able to bring up and return home yet, on top of that 15,000. And we haven't excavated or searched a tenth of the residential schools. This is in under 100 schools, and there were over 600 schools, right? And that's in the United States alone, not counting Canada, right? Why we would laugh over children dying, why anybody could laugh over horrific abuse of children is problematic to me. It shows a very colonized thought process, right? A thought process that is able to decide some people are less human than other people. That's a white supremacist colonized thought process, right? This thought process that deems which people are people and which people are not people. The residential schools were literally started, as was stated, because Native American people have been almost completely eradicated at this point. We went from 80 million so estimates are 50 million to 110 million people here in the Turtle Islands. So that would be, and that's in North America. That's not the entirety of both continents. That's in North America alone is 50 to 110 million people here. By the time that the residential schools are starting in the mid 1800s, early 1800s, and I think some actually started in the end of 1700s, but we really see our pickup in the mid 1800s. By the time this is starting, the vast majority of peoples have either been murdered, genocided, or they are locked onto reservations. And the idea of the residential schools is to train Indigenous children to be white. The idea of the residential schools is to indoctrinate Indigenous children. And the phrasing used, you can see that in the phrasing used, because the phrasing used is kill the Indian, save the man. That's what the residential schools were about, was kill the Indian, save the man. And so we see that Indigenous school, or that residential schools take Turtle Island Indigenous people, Native American people, and literally try to stamp them out in a new way. And to do this, they inflict such horrific abuse that it is so systemically a part of our culture anymore, right? As I was speaking earlier, the person that I consider my first husband, that I was with early on, whose family I still consider family, his parent, one of his parents was in residential schools, and it traumatized that parent for the rest of their life. He was pulled from the home before ICWA, right? And it traumatized him for the rest of his life. These traumas that are happening to these children are extreme abuse. We're not talking, oh my God, you got spanked. We're talking torture. And I mean torture. If you listen to people who have gone through residential schools, if you listen to people that have gone through Ebony, you were not. You will stop erasing people in my life. You are being anti-Indigenous. When you are deciding that because, yes, there's all skin colors here, without understanding that the copper skin tone changes that, this copper undertone to the skin, when you have decided that the Turtle Island Indigenous people don't exist, you are being anti-Indigenous. And there is nothing in this as being anti-Black. I am not being anti-Black on any level. And you keep stating it. Good. And if you're on the rolls, then that means you're Afro-Indigenous, unless you're on the rolls in one of those $5 tribes, which is not Turtle Island Indigenous. So We have to stop erasing each other. We have to stop letting white supremacists get the fucking upper hand. We have to. And anything that states that Turtle Island Indigenous people aren't Turtle Island Indigenous people is erasure of both Black people and Turtle Island Indigenous people. As I stated, I was going to leave 20 minutes ago. I am going to go ahead and leave now. If we need to do this again, we can do this again. Again, it was asked of me, and that's why I do it. This is not my main focus or intent. And it's not my, I wouldn't do it on my own because it's not my space to do it on my own, right? And, I because of me. I'm not telling you your history. I'm telling you not to tell me my history. I'm telling you not to tell everybody else their history. That's what I'm telling you. I'm not telling you your history. I didn't tell you where you came from. You told me where I came from. You told the person that was up here talking where they came from, but nobody told you where you came from. We're telling you that we know we were here. You telling us that we're wrong is the problem. That's it. And that's all. You don't get to twist it around. We don't play those games. This is not a gaslight space. It's not an abuse space. It's not a space where you get to play twist my words. I am specifically stating that in Turtle Island, the Indigenous people have specific attributes and understandings and have been here for 30,000 years at the very minimum, right? And because of that, stating that it's anybody else is erasing people, and you don't get to erase people. You don't. I don't care who you are. I don't care the color of your skin. I listen to Black women before white women always. I listen to Black women always, but it is not going to mean that I'm going to listen to you tell me that we don't exist. That's where you've crossed a line. And if you are on rolls, first of all, being on rolls and being enrolled are two different things, which if you were enrolled in an actual nation, you would know. Okay. If you are on the rolls, there are several different reasons that you might be enrolled in a nation, or you might be documented as being a part of a nation. And you can actually absolutely be descendant of an African slave and be enrolled in certain nations. But it does not mean that Africans were the people that were here. It means that you were adopted into a nation because Turtle Island Indigenous people recognize the trauma that you were going through, or in some cases, because you had been enslaved by that nation. And when slavery ended, they decided to invite people in and adopt them because, again, it was the right thing to do. To take the right thing to do and use it as a weapon to destroy a people is what the colonizers did. Colonizing much? To take kindness, to take love, and turn it into a weapon to kill a people or to destroy a people or to erase a people is colonization. Colonizer much? Take it elsewhere. Okay? And don't tell me you're on the rolls. Tell me what nation you're on the rolls of. And this is why. Because there are several nations out there that are not actually Turtle Island Indigenous nations, but a foreign government and a foreign occupation has taken the money from them to decide to incorporate them as a nation that never existed before. Well, it leaves nations that existed before out in the cold. So you're again taking from Turtle Island Indigenous people. Again, erasing Turtle Island Indigenous people. And nothing in that is a positive, and nothing in that is okay. And all of that is colonization, and all of that makes you mighty white. And I don't care what color you are. Acting mighty white is mighty white. Okay. And when you decide to erase a people, to take from a people, to tell a people that they didn't exist based on nothing, based on your opinion, based on some racist, based on white people's desire to excuse their atrocity, you're being problematic and you are participating in the erasure of Indigenous people and Black people and African people and history and what has actually happened. And you are uplifting and supporting white supremacy. And as long as you are uplifting and supporting white supremacy, I don't care what color your skin is, I am done. Doesn't matter. You do not have to be white to support white supremacy. Candace Owens, Kanye, you do not have to be white to support white supremacy. And if you're supporting white supremacy, not my space. And learn better, do better. How dare you support the people who are trying to kill you and me? So don't tell me you're on the rolls. Tell me what nation, because if you're on the rolls talking like that, you're not on the rolls of an actual nation and you are stealing from actual nations. Just stating, just stating. With all of that, it is with so much love, but I am not going to sit here all day. I have other things to do. We'll probably do this again. I'm sure there will probably be a time when somebody is asking me, and I am more than willing to provide space so that people can have a better understanding so that we can move forward better, right? Especially for people who have who have been marginalized and silenced in the past, right? Especially for those who've been silenced in the past, right? So it may happen again, but it's done for now. With much love, I will be back. It is Tuesday. I will be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm not sure what the topic will be at that point of time, but we will be back. And for all of those who came up and spoke today, I want to give you from the bottom of me thanks. I wish that I could speak better in my Indigenous tongues so that I could do it in a better way. But I want you to know that the love that you gave in the expression of knowledge that you have given to all the people in this space today, not just to me, is so appreciated and so loved and so needed within our space. And that your voices and that your knowledge is huge and needed within my space. And I thank you very much for that. Everybody else, and for everybody in here, have a great day. I love you all. I don't care if I've argued with you or if you're trying to erase me. I love you because really that's who we are. And we're supposed to be dealing with each other in love and in loving intent so that we can uplift all of us so that we can stop this hellhole that we're living in because none of us are okay and none of us are happy. Much love, everybody. Have a great day. Bye, YouTube. Love you guys so much. Have a great day.